Chapter 508. Saying, Dean was startled. Is it Aisha's sister? While he was deep in thought, a faint fragrance wafted over from the dark prison cell. It did not smell like any perfume or rouge. Following it was a slender and graceful figure, carrying a huge sword on her back. When they saw her face, both of them were stunned and blurted out almost in unison, "It's you?" Aisha was surprised to see Dean curled up in the cage. She had a good memory since childhood. At a glance, she recognized the boy that she had met once. Moreover, the situation of that meeting was a bit special. It left a deep impression on her. At this moment, she never thought that the boy who was framed by her sister and sent to the orphanage would be the one she met last time when they were hunting the Splitter. Dean was also surprised, as he didn't expect to meet the girl who had killed the Splitter here. Many doubts in his heart were instantly answered. Aisha had said that her sister could hunt monsters within level 100. But this girl could easily defeat the Splitter last time, although the Splitter had just laid eggs and was injured by him. But it was a legendary monster. There was a world of difference between a legendary monster and an ordinary monster at the same hunting level. In short, both of them were level 20 monsters. But a legendary monster could easily kill an ordinary monster. But a legendary monster was far beyond the hunting level defined in the Monster Atlas. For example, the legendary Splitter, which was level 68, was not inferior to an ordinary monster, which was level 100. It was obvious that she was Aisha's bad sister, since she had such strength and was a member of the Dragon Clan. Of course, he wouldn't believe Aisha's nonsense now that he was in such a situation. "Are you Haley?" Dean asked. Aisha was surprised. She shook her head. "I'm Aisha. The person who was in contact with you is my sister Haley." "Are you Aisha?" Dean was startled. No wonder she didn't worry that I would confess to her when she caught me. It's because I would only confess to Aisha. Sure enough, she's calculated everything, including my resistance. She's going to make use of everything. Thinking of this, all the mysteries in his heart were solved. When Hathaway saw his handkerchief, she recognized it as her sister's. So she used him and pretended to be her sister to get in touch with him. The first time they met, she invited him to join the Dragon Clan. She tried to let him enter the inner wall. It was obvious that if he agreed, then she would take him to a forbidden area of the Dragon Clan. At that time, the dragons would inevitably arrest him and investigate him in detail. Then they would follow the clues and point the spearhead to Aisha. But at that time, he refused. Moreover, he had become suspicious at that time, and Hathaway had probably seen through this. Hence, when they met again, she wasn't as impatient as the first time. She didn't confess and invite him. Instead, she chose another method, which was to provide him with the god's marrow. First, she gave him god's marrows to win his favor. The third time they met, she gave him the secretary of the Dragon Clan. The fourth time, she used the evidence to arrest him and frame the real Aisha. In a flash, Dean understood the whole story and the conspiracy process behind it. When Hathaway had sat on the ruins of the high-rise building and talked about her sister, she was vicious. Now it seemed that she had added emotional factors into it. Most of the elements were smearing the reputation of her sister. He was startled as he thought of this. He looked at Aisha. "The person who gave me the handkerchief is you?" Hearing Dean mention the handkerchief, the surprise in Aisha's eyes quickly disappeared. She couldn't help but carefully look at Dean. She was convinced that this was the little boy she had brought to the orphanage. After all, although there were black-haired and black-eyed bloodlines, there were not many of them. Most of them had brown hair and brown eyes. Moreover, she had only given the handkerchief to one person. "Are you the child who was wandering in the street in the heavy rain?" Aisha stared at him, even though she was convinced in her heart. There was a trace of strange feeling in Dean's heart when he heard a girl who was only 1 or 2 years older than him call him a child. But he had suffered a loss before. Although he was convinced that his guess was not far from the truth, he decided to carefully ask again. "Do you remember the situation at that time?" He didn't ask Haley directly, but he asked her indirectly. But she said that she didn't remember. Such an answer was reasonable at that time. After all, it was 8 or 9 years ago, so it was normal that she didn't remember. The night was dark, and it was raining heavily. As soon as Aisha heard Dean's question, She knew that he had suffered because of her sister. She wanted to confirm his identity. She couldn't help but recall that night. It was the first night she climbed over the wall and left a deep impression. At that time, you were walking on the street, wearing strange clothes. Your face was very pale, like a bloodless corpse. I saw your whole body was wet. The rain was too lethal for ordinary people like you, so I took you to a shack to take shelter from the rain. Dean was stunned. When he heard her say that he was wearing a strange outfit, he was already convinced that this was the cute little girl who brought him to the orphanage. At that time, his body was weak, and he almost fell down. She was the one who supported him all the way. Thinking of this, his eyes suddenly surged with warmth, but in the next moment, it was followed by a chill from head to toe. Aisha's eyes narrowed as she saw Dean's face suddenly turn pale. She stepped forward and said, "What's wrong with you? Are you not feeling well? I see that your body temperature is very low. I'm sorry." Dean didn't seem to hear her words. He lowered his eyes and clenched his fists tightly. "I hurt you." He rarely blamed himself, but this time he felt a strong sense of guilt from the bottom of his heart. This sense of guilt twisted his heart into a ball, as if his body was being strangled, making it difficult for him to breathe. The reason why he wore the handkerchief was that he hoped that if he met the little girl again in the future, he could return her kindness. However, not only did he not return this kindness to her, but he also hurt her again. Although he knew that the main cause of this incident was Hathaway's plan, and his hatred and killing intent towards her were the same thing, it was an unavoidable fact that he had fallen into her trap. He wouldn't completely vent his anger on her, but he regretted that he didn't listen to his intuition when he noticed that something was strange, but was swayed by his own feelings. Seeing Dean's painful look, Aisha was slightly startled. She didn't expect that this person, whom she had only met twice, would blame himself for this matter. There was a trace of apology in her heart, and she whispered, "I'm the one who should say sorry. If I hadn't indulged her for so many years, she wouldn't have done such a thing. She just wanted to deal with me, but she got you involved. It's me who implicated you." Dean still lowered his head, slightly shook his head, and said in a hoarse voice, "If I could be more sensitive, I wouldn't have fallen into her trap, and there wouldn't be today's situation. Not only did I let myself fall into such a situation, but I also hurt you. This is a failure, a fatal failure. If I could be more rational, trust my intuition, and hold the attitude of I would rather kill the wrong person than let go, I wouldn't have been deceived by her." Aisha suddenly felt that there was a stubbornness in this boy, a lonely stubbornness. Her eyes flashed slightly, and her cheeks softened a bit. "That's right, but you believed her because you thought she was me, so you didn't guard against her." Hearing her comforting words, Dean knew that she was right. This time, he wasn't rational enough. He didn't listen to his intuition several times, but was swayed by his subjective feelings. This made the pain and hatred in his heart stronger, and at the same time, there was a trace of confusion. He didn't hate Haley, but himself. A kind person will be gullible to others. A bad person will be ruthless when dealing with others and would rather kill the wrong person than let go. But for familiar people, close friends, relatives, lovers, if because of a little suspicion they would rather kill the wrong person than let go, then what kind of person are they? Or are they still human? But if I don't, how many people will pretend to be my relatives, friends, and stab me when I'm least prepared? He thought of Crone who betrayed him, Jenny's father who framed him, and Haley's disguise. If he was just an ordinary person, then perhaps he wouldn't encounter all these things. But he had come this far and couldn't return to ordinary life. Even if he could be an ordinary person, how could he be willing? How could he stop because of the fear of encountering these things again? Chapter 509. Aisha's lips slightly moved as she saw Dean's depressed look. You don't have to blame yourself for anything. She was deliberately using you. It would be strange if you were aware of it. Moreover, I should thank you for this matter. Thank you for letting me get rid of the identity of saint. I can live freely like others. Dean was startled as he looked up at her. I was born with awakened ability. I have been given high expectations since childhood. I have been undergoing rigorous training since I can remember. There was a faint smile hanging on Aisha's mouth. There was a bit of reminiscence in her eyes. Day after day of training, learning, fighting. I'm like a puppet that exists to kill. Today, finally, this shackle no longer shackles me. So, I really want to thank you. She stared at Dean with a serious expression. Dean was startled. He didn't expect that a girl who was a little older than him would lead such a boring and monotonous life. This matter is a good thing for me, but Aisha looked at Dean with a trace of apology in her eyes. I'm really sorry for involving you in this matter. You almost lost your life. Dean's mouth slightly moved as he shook his head. It's not you who should say sorry. Moreover, I'm used to such things. He had been inexplicably involved in several crises in the past and almost lost his life. He still remembered the physical examination when he entered the school. The radiation value in his blood had reached the standard, and he was taken to the hunter's constitution test. He almost lost his life because two hunters were talking to each other. Later, he was framed by Jenny's father because he liked Jenny's daughter. Including this time, because of the fight between Aisha and Hathaway, he was involved in it and almost lost his life. The reasons for these dangers were comical and laughable to him, but this was the true nature of this world. The root cause was that he was too weak. The weak were always out of control of their own lives. Hunters were like this, and so were ordinary people. A diligent worker may lose his position and source of income because of the arrival of the superior's relatives. An excellent soldier could lose his life because of a bad bet made by an officer. As the saying goes, my fate is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens, and man can conquer nature. Was the heaven here referring to the emotionless dead thing that overlooked all living beings and turned a blind eye to countless injustices and sufferings? The real heaven referred to people like the Son of Heaven in ancient times, who stood at the highest point. Only humans could decide the life and death of others, and they could also make others wish they were dead. Aisha was silent for a moment after hearing Dean's words. You will have a hard time in the future. I hope you can stick to it. If there is a chance, I will apply to the Patriarch to let you return to your original life. For now on. Dean was startled. You mean, your dragon clan won't execute me? Haishan nodded. I have already told the Patriarch that he will keep you alive. But based on my understanding of him, he should transfer you to the Dragon Guards and use you as a waste. Recycling? Dean's mouth twitched as he heard her blunt words. But as long as he could live, it didn't matter if he was treated as waste by the Dragon Clan. So what if he was used as waste? However, listening to Aisha's tone, the Dragon Guards didn't seem to be a good job. He asked, what does the Dragon Guards do? Does it have anything to do with the wasteland? There was a trace of surprise in Aisha's eyes. She didn't expect Dean to know the existence of the wasteland, but she quickly thought of her sister Hathaway and understood. She nodded. Yes, the responsibility of the Dragon Guards is to assist the pioneers to clean up the monsters in the outer edge of the wasteland. It is similar to the hunters in the outer wall, but the monsters they encounter are much stronger and the mortality rate is higher. Dean was startled and suddenly understood. No wonder they were used as waste. Their work outside the wall could be sacrificed at any time. However, it was normal for the Dragon Clan to do so. When he was caught here, he didn't think that he could survive or leave easily. After all, he had obtained the secret fighting scroll of the Dragon Clan. If he let him go, wouldn't it be the same as leaking the secret fighting techniques of the Dragon Clan? It didn't matter if he was sent to be the Dragon Guards, even if he was sacrificed. It was indeed recycling. Fortunately, I can still live. Dean wasn't worried. Instead, he was secretly glad. Aisha saw that Dean was startled and didn't speak. You don't have to worry. Although you will be a Dragon Guard, it won't be difficult to survive as long as you are careful. Moreover, the family will give you God's marrows and fighting techniques to improve your combat effectiveness. It will allow you to reach the basic standard of the Dragon Guards, which is the level of a senior limitless. Dean nodded slightly, but he wasn't too happy in his heart. After all, God's marrows were dead things. In the eyes of the Dragon Clan, they were just some materials. These materials were given to him to improve his combat effectiveness. They also hoped that he could better complete the tasks of the Dragon Guards. After all, Even if it was a waste, it had to be used to make good use of it. What are your magic marks? Aisha asked. Dean glanced at her, his mind turning. Aisha saw the subtle changes in his face as he was about to tell a lie. She knew that she had touched the privacy of others. She immediately changed her words. Is it a rare level? If not, I can provide you with a good rare level magic mark so that your survivability can be improved. After all, you were involved in this matter because of me. I'm the one who harmed you. Dudian knew her intention when he heard her question. He shook his head. I would have died if it wasn't for you. This should be the second time you saved me. Aisha shook her head. You wouldn't have encountered such danger if it wasn't for me. Dudian deeply looked at her, but didn't say anything. He knew that it would be difficult to repay the girl's help. After the incident with Hathaway, he was clear that before he became strong enough, he would only harm himself and others if he tried to repay the kindness of others. Do you need to replace your rare magic marks? Aisha said, I have Steel Dragon, Devourer, Black Weaver, and Silicon Rock in my hands. They are all rare magic marks with strong, life-saving properties. Dudian could see that she really wanted to help him. However, the girl's expression was always flat when she spoke. It seemed that she didn't know how to get along with people. He shook his head. No, I'm used to it. I'm not used to replacing it with other magic marks. You have helped me enough. I can survive this time because of you. He wanted to say that he would repay her if he had a chance in the future, but he didn't say it. It was meaningless to say it. After all, she didn't expect him to repay her for what she had done for him. Yes, Aisha nodded. The magic marks are the most suitable for you. In that case, you should stick to it. Dudian nodded. Aisha didn't say anything more. She looked at him meaningfully and turned to leave the cell. Dudian looked at her back through the bars of the cell. He slowly retracted his gaze. His depressed mood was filled with hope again. But suddenly he thought of one thing. Aisha's sanest identity had been replaced by the previous Haley. Now that she had the sanest identity, she had greater power. Would she continue to frame him in the future? Did he really only need to be a good dragon desolate guard and survive? He didn't think that this woman would give up. Moreover, he could infer a lot of things from the previous conversation on the ruins of the high-rise building. Although this woman had been deceiving him from beginning to end, some of the things she said might not be lies. After all, a real lie should always be half true, so that people would believe it. One thing could be confirmed from Haley's words. That Aisha, who gave him the handkerchief and took him to the orphanage, really didn't have any friends. Although he was in the cell and couldn't see the whole picture, but he could judge from a person's words and expression. Combined with Haley's previous words, he could basically conclude. This seemed to be useless information, but Dudian understood that it was extremely dangerous. If Aisha didn't have any friends, then he would be used by Hathaway once again due to the relationship between them. Unless she suddenly softened and was satisfied with the saintess identity and wouldn't deal with Aisha again. However, according to Dudian's previous chat with her, the practices of the bad sister Haley were a great degree of discrediting. This represented a strong hatred. This kind of hatred might not be satisfied by pulling the other party down from the altar. It seems that there will be a lot of trouble in the future. Dudian's eyes turned gloomy. Staying in the Dragon Clan wasn't a long-term solution. He must find a way to leave as soon as possible and produce his own invention. Only then would he have the power to protect himself. However, the production of the invention would take at least 3 to 5 months. Moreover, with his current sensitive identity, would the Dragon Clan let him leave easily? Obviously not. Dudian wrinkled his brows as he thought about all kinds of possibilities. Time flew. Half a day after Aisha left, a voice came from the cell again. Dean was sitting cross-legged in the cell. He was thinking about his own things. But when the cell door opened, he came back to his senses. Although he didn't look up, he saw a figure coming from outside the cell. It was the blonde youth who had gone with Haley to arrest him outside the giant wall. Cyrus looked at Dudian in the dark cell. He ordered the jailer, "Open the door." The jailer had already seen the handwritten order he had brought, so he opened the cage as instructed. Dudian slowly stood up. "Come out. The elder wants to see you." Cyrus frowned as he spoke quickly. He closed his mouth and stopped breathing because the smell in the cell was too disgusting. Dudian's eyes lit up as he nodded and stepped out of the cell. Cyrus turned around and left. Dudian followed him. There was a low-lying valley outside the cell. It was surrounded by thorns and strange flowers. The flowers were brightly colored and were famous poisonous plants in the Flora Atlas. Cyrus didn't say a word as he walked in front of Cyrus. Dean followed closely behind, not squinting, but secretly carefully observing the surroundings. Anyway, walking like this was the same as walking, and at the same time memorizing the route. There will always be some harvest. Although it may not be used in the future, but there is always a chance in life, right? It didn't take long for Dudian to follow Cyrus to reach a high peak. There was a castle here. It covered a large area and looked magnificent. There was a square outside the castle. There were some giant stone sculptures on the square. They seemed to be the ancestors of the dragon clan. Dragon guards wearing standard armor were standing in the corridors outside the castle. Although there was no one around, they were still standing upright and had an imposing appearance. Cyrus led Dudian to the main hall of the castle. There was a bright red carpet spread all the way to the door. It was spacious and tall. It looked like a huge church, but there were no rows of chairs or podium. There was only a bronze throne. A burly man was sitting on it. He was wearing a vest-like armor. His shoulders and arms were dark and full of muscles. On his lower body, he wore loose brown pants that looked like a butcher's and a pair of boots with alloy soles. However, the most eye-catching thing was on his back. There were actually 2 spikes protruding from his back, pressing against the throne behind him. They looked like the spikes on the back of a lizard, one long and one short. The long one was more than 20 centimeters, while the short one was more than 10 centimeters. They looked extremely terrifying. Dudian was shocked as he looked at the man from afar. The man's body was extremely hot, like a burning fireball. It was almost comparable to Haley's. However, she was much inferior to Aisha, whom he had seen in the prison cell. The heat on Aisha's body was restrained, like a mass of dark red blood flowing in her body. Although people couldn't distinguish the specific heat density, they could roughly feel some of the intensity. It was several times stronger than this person. But this man's heat was very easy to see. It was completely released, as if he was in the most excited state. Is this also a pioneer level? Dudian's eyes flashed. The Dragon Clan was really strong. He just met a random person who had such terrifying strength. Moreover, according to the blonde youth, he was just an elder and not a patriarch. Elder Harlika, this is the outsider who got the Dragon Thorn chapter, Cyrus respectfully said. Harlika raised his dark golden eyes and looked at Dudian. The golden streamers in his eyes seemed to divide Dudian. He said in a rough and hoarse voice, "You go back." "Yes." Cyrus respectfully nodded and quickly turned away. He didn't want to stay in front of this monster for a moment. Harlika looked at Dudian after Cyrus left. "You come over." Dudian felt hostility from Harlika. Did Haley's revenge start so soon? Is this elder one of her people? With that in mind, he slowly took a few steps forward. Harlika saw that Dudian was walking very slowly. It seemed that he didn't dare to step forward. He coldly snorted, "Black-haired boy, do you know how badly you have harmed Her Royal Highness Aisha?" Dudian was startled, but relieved at the same time. It seemed that this person wasn't one of Haley's people. Harlika snorted as he saw Dudian. Her Royal Highness Aisha has been conscientiously guarding the wasteland for so many years. She almost died several times and became the rations of those monsters. She had sacrificed everything for this family. Her childhood, her life, her freedom. She had sacrificed all of it. But now, because of you, you damnable brat, you've caused her to be replaced by that little girl who only knows how to think. Dudian was stunned. He knew that Aisha's life as a saint was very hard, but now it seemed that she wasn't completely against it. Instead, she was sincerely sacrificing for the family. That's right. If a person is against it, who can force him? Not to mention a strong person like her. He was silent as he thought of this. Chapter 510. You are just an ignorant kid from the outer wall. How dare you peek at the secret techniques of the Dragon Clan? With the IQ of the people from the outer wall, you want to learn the fighting techniques of our Dragon Clan? Harley felt that Dean was an eyesore. If Her Highness Aisha didn't save your life, then you would have been punished by the Dragon Penitentiary. You would have become the Dragon Worm's food. Dean was silent. He didn't argue with Harley because it was meaningless to argue with someone who was destined to be a passerby. Her Highness Aisha saved you this time. You can be spared from death, but you can't be spared from punishment. Harley coldly looked down at Dean. I called you over to tell you that you will be a member of our Dragon Clan from now on. You will never leave the Dragon Clan's territory. Otherwise, you will be killed without mercy. Dean wrinkled his brows as he looked up at him. Never leave. Of course. Harley didn't expect that Dean would dare to question him. Not only you will die if you dare to leak out the secret techniques of the Dragon Clan, but the people you leaked will also die. Your family, friends, and everyone related to you will all die. Dean frowned as he continued to ask, since I'm a member of the Dragon Clan, then won't I have the freedom to leave this place? Harley didn't expect that the kid would dare to use his words against him. He sneered as he looked at Dean's eyes. Ordinary members of the Dragon Clan can leave, but you are just an outer wall member. Do you want to leave the Dragon Clan's territory? It's not that there isn't a way, but it's very simple. You will naturally be granted freedom when you have enough merits. I will recognize that you are a true member of the Dragon Clan at that time. But there was a bit of sarcasm on his face. It's a pipe dream for you to establish enough merits with your ability. How much does it mean to have enough merits? How do I get it? Dean turned a blind eye to Harley's sarcasm. Seeing that he still didn't give up, Harley sneered. It's not much, just 10,000 merit points. The way to obtain it is very simple. You will become a member of the Desolate Dragon Guard. Every time you go on a mission, there will be a random merit reward. Completing different missions will give you different merit rewards. These merit rewards will not only give you freedom, but can also be exchanged for secret fighting techniques, demon hunter dragon armor, and weapons from the ancient era. Weapons from the ancient era? Dean's eyes moved. The people of the Giant Wall naturally refer to the old era. Did the Dragon Clan have weapons left from the old era? What could it be? Guns? Tanks? Cannon? He thought that in addition to firearms, tanks and cannons were impossible to exist. After all, tanks contain the technology to convert diesel into electricity. There was also a computer system. If the dragons could restore the tanks of the old era, then the technology they had mastered behind the scenes was enough to flatten the Giant Wall. Why would they be limited to this small Giant Wall? I see. Thank you. Dean nodded as he began to ponder. Harley was surprised as he felt a trace of strangeness. The kid seemed to be different from the average person. If it was someone else who heard the previous humiliation, then they would have been filled with resentment or unwillingness. But Dean was extremely calm, as if he hadn't said those words. Well, he is a patient kid. Is he as good at scheming as that little girl? Harley thought in his heart and narrowed his eyes slightly. He had always disliked those who liked to use their brains. They were too good at scheming and not honest at all. They didn't know when they had been betrayed and needed to be on guard all the time. This made him very disgusted. Kid, Harley voice was slightly raised as he stared at Dean. Dean frowned as he felt the sudden change in Harley attitude. Your life was saved by Her Highness Aisha. You better never forget that. Harley said word by word. Dudian was startled. He looked at him and nodded slightly. Harley deeply looked at him. Moreover, Her Highness Aisha saved your life not once, but twice. Twice. Dean was startled as he looked at Harley Did Harley know about his childhood with Aisha? The second time was me. Harley's words dispelled Dean's speculation. If it wasn't for Her Royal Highness Aisha who told me to take good care of you, then the first task I would have given you would be the most difficult one. It's what we call the corpse team. Dean was startled when he heard this, but soon understood. He could not help but feel a chill in his heart. It seemed that the enemy he would have to face in the future wasn't just Haley, but the entire dragon family. Naturally, this also included those who stood on Aisha's side, like Harley in front of him. After all, he thought that Haley might use him to frame Aisha again. Other people who supported Aisha would naturally consider this point. Naturally, they hoped that the hidden danger would disappear. Aisha's face emerged in his mind as he thought of this. There was a trace of unspeakable feeling in his heart. The girl had considered this point long ago. That's why she specifically told Harley Ka to save his life. Strictly speaking, it was the third time. If you can survive and grow up, then you better remember Her Highness Aisha's kindness. Harley Ka said in a cold tone. Otherwise, I'll be the first to not let you go. Of course, if you die halfway, then forget what I said. But the probability is quite high. Although Her Highness Aisha told me to take care of you, but anything can happen outside the giant wall. You may encounter legendary monsters as soon as you get out of the giant wall. It's up to your luck whether you can survive or not. Dean was silent. You have half a month left. In this half a month, we will provide you with God's marrows and rare magic marks so that you can break through and become a primary frontiersman. That way you will have a little power to protect yourself. Harley Ka indifferently said, wait for half a month. It will be your first mission. I will send you a relatively easy team and task. If you can't complete this mission and die outside the giant wall, then I can't do anything. I know. Thank you. Dean bowed slightly and said in a serious tone. Chapter 511. Yes, Elder. A figure came out from the shadows of the hall. It was a thin youth with pale skin and a handsome face. He looked at Dean. Come with me. Dean nodded, but he was secretly surprised. He didn't see this person's figure in the hall before. Moreover, he didn't see the slightest heat reaction from this person's body. He was like a corpse. This person's blood is cold. Dean's eyes lit up as he followed behind the youth. He was vigilant as he knew that he couldn't rely too much on his thermal vision in the future. He wouldn't be able to perceive monsters or special magic marks. After leaving the hall, Norwich and Duddian left the mountain. They walked along the gravel road and came to another mountain not far away. The foot of this mountain didn't have a magnificent castle like the previous one. Instead, it was a residential building. There were more than a dozen figures inside the building. Their bodies exuded different levels of heat. Some of them had extremely weak heat similar to ordinary people. It was estimated that they were servants or had a special magic mark ability to reduce the body heat. Norwich was a man of few words and remained silent throughout the journey. He paused for a moment in front of the residential building and said, "It's up there. Follow me." Dean followed him along the winding steps to the top of the mountain peak. The mountain peak was like a terraced field. There were residential buildings in each section of the mountain. Some had gardens and courtyards for drinking tea. In the blink of an eye, they reached the middle section of the mountain peak. Norwich went to a residential building and stood outside the guardrail. He called out to the house inside, "Ian." Dean stood behind him. He saw 5 figures in the residential building. One of them was very strong. It was as hot as Cyrus. 3 of them were similar in heat, but slightly inferior. The last one was the weakest. It was similar to Francis from the monastery. The figures didn't respond to Norwich's words. They were still sitting or standing in the same position as before. With a creak, the door suddenly opened. A youth with wheat-colored hair opened the door. He had an indifferent expression, but there was a gloomy look in his eyes. Dean's heart turned cold. It was another person who was good at disguising magic marks. Ian frowned as he saw Norwich and Dean. "What's the matter?" Norwich smiled. "Your team is currently missing a member. His name is Dean. He is a new member of your team." Ian had expected Dudian's arrival. He looked up and down at Dudian. What did this person do before? Dragon attendant? From the looks of it, he seems quite weak. Norwich smiled. Dean is currently a senior hunter. He will be given resources to become a primary limitless hunter before the start of your next mission in half a month. He will be able to cooperate with your actions. A senior hunter? Ian's eyes widened. What did you say? Just a senior hunter? A tall and sturdy man with dark skin rushed out of the room. He looked a bit like a black man from the olden era. He stared at him with his large eyes that were clearly white and said, "Did you make a mistake? A few days ago, we just lost a rookie, and today, we brought another one. What do you think our 7th squad is? A squad that specializes in collecting trash?" Norwich maintained his smile. This is the will of the elder. You. The burly man stared at him. Norwich smiled and said, Ian, I'll leave him to you. Also, the elder said that since you have 2 newbies this time, it's very likely that you will be sent to the Orange Wasteland for the next mission. So don't complain. Norwich waved his hand and turned around to leave. Ian and the black man froze for a moment after hearing Norwich's words, but they were relieved. Their eyes fell on Dean's body, and they sighed. They felt a trace of helplessness. You, Dean, come in and introduce yourself to everyone. Ian waved to Dean. Dean obeyed and walked over. After entering the room, he saw that it was extremely spacious. However, the living room was very messy. The floor was full of discarded fruit peels, overturned pastries, and other things. The light in the room was poor, and the air smelled bad. It was far from the fresh air outside. He had previously seen several people sitting on the sofa in the living room with their feet on the table. Their expressions were lazy and gloomy. Dean often saw this kind of gloomy expression on hunters. This was the temperament that people who had been fighting on the edge of life and death for a long time would naturally develop. However, the people in front of him were more obvious and gloomier. Let me introduce you to the new member. His name is Dean. Ian entered the living room and sat on an empty sofa chair. He pointed at Dean and said to the rest of the people. The rest of the people bowed their heads and picked their nails. They were lazily lying on the sofa with their hands spread out. They didn't look up at Dean because of his introduction. However, there were 2 people who looked at Dean. One of them was the one with the weakest heat. He was a blond youth with a scar on his face. He looked ordinary, but at the moment his eyes were full of curiosity. At the same time, there was a trace of joy in his eyes. It seemed that he had found his companion. The other one was a slender woman in black. Her expression was indifferent as she quietly examined Dean. I heard that it's another rookie? A young man who was leaning on the sofa lazily said. The burly man heard the words and said angrily, Elder, are you planning to make our team a rookie team? You actually sent 2 rookies. There are only 7 people. Now 2 rookies are rookies. The 5 of us are nannies. Ian was slightly silent. The woman in black who was looking at Dean indifferently said, Who let Miso die? I guess the elder thinks that we can't carry out the task in the Red Wasteland without Miso. So he sent 2 rookies so that we can carry out the task in the Orange Wasteland. At the same time, we can cultivate the rookies. There was silence in the living room as they heard his words. Ian sighed and shook his head. In any case, the task in the Orange Wasteland isn't low. Don't take it lightly. Moreover, as long as we can complete all the tasks, we will get thousands of merit points, even if we are in the Orange Wasteland. The blond youth with a scar on his face asked curiously, Who is Miso? Chapter 5:12. The golden-haired youth responded with an "oh" and did not speak again. Dean looked at Ian and asked, Are you the current captain? What do you mean by Red Wasteland and Orange Wasteland? Are they different areas with different levels of danger? Ian glanced at him and said, That's right. The Red Wasteland is very dangerous. It's easy to encounter some high-level demons that the pioneers missed. Even the pioneers could lose their lives in the Red Wasteland if they are not careful. Ian nodded. Dean's eyes flashed and said, So, the previous Captain Miso was a pioneer? Hearing this, the eyes of the people in the room slightly turned and fell on Dean. Ian looked at Dean for a while and said, No, Miso is a high-level limitless like us. However, he has mastered a secret fighting skill, and his fighting capacity is much stronger than ours. He can even exchange a few blows with the pioneers. Dean understood and was surprised. He didn't expect the secret fighting technique of the Dragon Clan to be so strong. Just by mastering it, he could show disdain for others of the same level. However, the one who died was the strongest and not the weakest. It was ironic. Dean didn't continue to inquire about the cause of death of Miso. He had just joined the team. If he asked about this, it would be easy to touch their sore spot. No one would answer, and it would be embarrassing. He directly asked, You just said that we can get thousands of merit points by completing all the tasks? Are the tasks difficult to complete? How often do we go on a mission? How long does it take to complete each mission? Ian looked at him. He felt that this newcomer had a calm temperament compared to the previous one. In the battle outside the giant wall, this was undoubtedly an advantage. Although he felt a little annoyed with Dean and the blonde youth next to him, but he also knew that they were sent by the elders. It was useless to complain about them. On the contrary, it would create gaps in the team. If they wanted to complete the tasks, they would inevitably need to cooperate with the team. If there was a gap in the execution of the tasks, there would inevitably be some sad situations. Every time we carry out a mission, our superiors will assign us a main mission and a few side missions. We can choose to complete these side missions and get extra rewards, but it will take up a lot of time. In the barren area, every second we spend in the barren area is one step closer to death. No one can predict what will happen in the next second, so we usually only do the main missions that we must complete, Ian explained. How often do we go on a mission? Dean repeated. Ian vaguely guessed his intentions, and a meaningful look flashed in his eyes as he said, every time a mission is completed, there is a month of rest and adjustment time. If a team member is sacrificed, they will get an extra month of rest, and, at the same time, a new team member will be added. Dean wrinkled his brows. Generally, the casualty rate should be very high, right? Kid, why are you asking so many questions? If you're afraid of death, then leave as soon as possible. The black man from before snorted. Dean didn't pay attention to him. He didn't even look at him. He just looked at Ian. Ian saw that Dean was waiting for his answer. Yes, the casualty rate is very high. If you're lucky, then the whole team can come back safely. If you are unlucky, then it is very common for the whole team to be destroyed. Dean nodded and asked, what if the main task is not completed? How many merit points are there for the Red Wasteland tasks? If the task is not completed, then the same amount of merit points will be deducted. If your merit points become negative 3,000, then your status as a Dragon Guard will be canceled, and you will be sent to the Dragon Guard team in the Wasteland. Ian looked at him and said, the reward for the main mission in the Red Wasteland usually ranges from 3 to 5,000 merit points. If you complete all the additional missions, you can even get tens of thousands of merit points at once. But that is impossible. No one would do the additional missions when they are in the Red Wasteland. That would be suicide. Ian looked at Ian and said, Dragon Guard? Dean was surprised. Yes, the job of the Dragon Guard is to follow the Saintess to guard the Wasteland. The death rate is very high. Ian said, it is said that in the past 200 years since the establishment of the Dragon family, there were no more than 3 Dragon Guards who were able to live until retirement. Dean understood that Ian was a dead man. If we want to carry out the Red Wasteland task, then we can only be sent by the higher-ups. Can't we choose by ourselves? Dean asked. Of course. Ian shrugged. How can we have the right to choose? Dean nodded. He had the same feeling in his heart, but he didn't show it. He secretly calculated. The rest time for each task is 2 months. If we carry out the Orange Wasteland task, then it will take at least 2 years to accumulate tens of thousands of merit points and get the right to act freely. 2 years was not a long time for an ordinary teenager who was about to turn 18 years old. It was just a memory of the green years of life. But for him, it was undoubtedly a long and fatal time. It was absolutely a pipe dream for him to live for 2 years when he could encounter Haley and Aisha's supporters at any time. Moreover, after 2 years, he would accumulate enough merit points which would make him stronger. This would definitely arouse Haley's killing intent. After all, in her opinion, he was already on Aisha's side. I have to find a way to sneak out and produce the new invention. Dean's eyes flashed as he pondered in his heart. Honestly, completing the task to get merit points was simply taking his life as a joke. You have just come to report. There's an empty room above. You can live there in the future, Ian said to Dean. Your resources will be sent soon after half a month. Be sure to master the ability to improve. Don't play abnormally in the battle. If you have nothing to do, then you can find us to learn from each other. Dean looked at him. He knew that Ian was thinking about the team. Ian was worried that he wouldn't be able to master the soaring strength and newly acquired ability after he was promoted from senior hunter to primary limitless. I will master myself, Dean said. It was inevitable that his magic marks would be exposed if they were to learn from each other. Most importantly, he was also worried that if he suddenly promoted to primary limitless, then he would kill them in case he couldn't control his strength well. Chapter 513. It didn't take long for 2 dragon attendants to bring a box. There were some small bottles inside. Dean had seen the god's marrows before. In addition to the god's marrows, there were 8 finger-long, transparent bottles. There were 8 parasitic soul worms in different shapes. These parasitic soul worms had different appearances. Some looked like caterpillars, green and soft. Some were black and had soft tentacles that looked like snails. Some looked like iron nematodes, and their bodies were silver and looked like thin threads. At a glance, Dean saw that there were 8 rare named monsters. These are the resources for you. It will be enough for you to stimulate your magic marks in half a month. Ian handed the box to Dean. Take it. If you want to get these resources in the future, you have to earn it yourself. Dean nodded. He knew that this matter wasn't without harm. Although he could collect 8 rare parasitic soul worms with his previous identity as the 9th elder of the Dark Church, but it was hard to say how much time he would have. As for the god's marrows, he would have to spend a lot of effort to get them. Moreover, the amount of god's marrows, he wouldn't be able to get enough. Although his new invention could give him the power to protect himself, but if his physique was too weak, then he would be assassinated by the other side. After all, the invention was an external force. He didn't have the ability and materials to make a missile or a nuclear reactor. Even if he did, he wouldn't be able to protect himself. After all, in front of a non-human powerhouse like the Pioneer, no matter how powerful the weapon was, it would be useless. He would be killed before he could launch it. He took the box and returned to the empty room upstairs that Ian had told him about. This room used to be filled with junk. It was covered in dust, and there were some spider webs in the corner. He cleaned it up a little and only emptied the bed. He didn't care about the rest. He didn't plan on staying here for long anyway. He opened the box and took out the god's marrows. He opened the bottle and sniffed it. It was similar to the batch of god's marrows that Hathaway gave him last time. He pondered for a moment and decided to find something else to try first. After all, he had no idea how many people he had to pass the god's marrow to in the process of it being delivered to him. If someone tried to harm him and mixed a little poison into the god's marrow, he could inject it into his body. No matter how strong his physique was, he would still fall for it. His eyes flickered as he suddenly thought of the golden-haired young man from before. His heart skipped a beat, and after a moment of hesitation, he made up his mind. At night, Dean came to Eugene's room and knocked on the door. The door opened quickly. Eugene looked at Dean. "It's you? You're still awake?" Dean smiled. "No, I want to talk to you." Eugene was stunned for a moment. Then he smiled and said, "Sure. I was also worried about being alone." With that, he opened the door completely. Dean entered Eugene's room and looked around. It was similar to his own room. There were almost no decorations. He looked at Eugene, who closed the door. "I heard that you were a newcomer. You should have just become a primary frontiersman, right?" Eugene went back to the bed and sat down. "Yeah, I was sent here as a primary frontiersman. Am I unlucky?" Dean smiled. "Are you nervous?" "It's all right." Eugene shrugged. "You only have one life anyway. It doesn't matter if you die." Dean heard his funny words and smiled. "It's too boring to die like this. We have to live well." "That's true." Eugene smiled. Dean took out 2 bottles of god's marrows and a syringe from his arms. "These are the resources that were sent to me today. I have estimated that there are more. I hope this can help you improve your strength." "For me?" Eugene looked at him in surprise. Then his eyes flashed as if he had thought of something, and a hint of realization appeared in his eyes. Dean pretended to be embarrassed and scratched his head. "I'm also a newcomer. You have heard that I'm more unlucky than you. I was caught when I was a senior hunter. In half a month, we will have to go on a mission. It will be very dangerous. The others are too strong. They may not take care of us during the mission. Once I break through to primary frontiersmen, our physiques will be the same. If we fall behind, we can take care of each other." Eugene knew that the newcomer wanted to build a relationship with him so that he wouldn't die during the mission. Dean laughed. "We will be teammates in the future, so we should take care of each other. I can't accept this thing. I'll treat it as a friend. Since you regard me as a friend, you should accept the things. Otherwise, I will feel sorry." Dean enthusiastically stuffed the things into his hands. Eugene didn't refuse. After all, it was just 2 bottles of God's marrow. It wouldn't improve his strength by much. However, he understood Dean's approach. After all, God's marrows were very precious for a senior hunter. Only 1 or 2 bottles of God's marrows were enough to make a senior hunter's physique soar. Therefore, Dean thought that these 2 bottles of God's marrows would improve his physique. That's why Dean only took out 2 bottles to please him. Eugene didn't explain anything as he put the God's marrow on the table. "I'll accept it. We will take care of each other in the future mission." Dean nodded and looked at the God's marrow on the table. "You should absorb it now. I heard that the longer you keep it, the lower the effectiveness. I'll use it before going to bed." Eugene laughed. Dean didn't continue to persuade Eugene to avoid being exposed. He chatted with him for a while and tried to get more information out of him. After chatting for a while, he found an excuse to leave. Dean's pupils shrank as he left the room. The world entered into a thermal vision. He turned around and left without looking back, but he was observing Eugene in the room through the thermal vision. He saw Eugene sit back on the bed. Eugene reached out to the table and picked up the God's marrow. It seemed that Eugene was sizing up the God's marrow. But the next moment, Dean was slightly startled. Eugene looked at the God's marrow for a moment. He put the God's marrow back and put it into the drawer of the table. He didn't use it? Dean frowned. It seemed that Eugene wasn't as simple and easygoing as he seemed. Eugene was on guard against him, as he was worried that Dean would play tricks in the God's marrow. Dean was speechless. He went back to the room and considered other methods to verify the information. 2 days passed in the blink of an eye. Chapter 514. He lost 2 bottles of God's marrows. Dean had to change his target. On the 3rd night, he went to the mountain under the guise of taking a walk. He relied on his thermal vision to find some small animals living in the mountain. He caught a little thing that looked like a pangolin and injected the divine marrow he had prepared in advance into this little thing's body. He didn't use these animals for the test because he considered the characteristics of the God's marrows. It might not be perfectly reflected in animals. After all, the structure of the human body was different from that of animals. God's marrows were similar to drugs, so there would be some special reactions due to these differences. It was impossible to verify whether the reactions came from the differences between humans and animals or from the God's marrows. After the injection, Dean picked up the little thing and prepared to take it back to his residence for further observation. Who would have thought that as soon as he picked up the little thing, it would suddenly struggle violently? The scales all over its body were faintly blood red, and its tiny eyes were also slightly red. Its eyeballs were bloodshot, as if it had suddenly turned from a docile animal into a bloodthirsty monster. Dean was startled, as he didn't expect the effect to be so fast. He immediately put the little thing down. As soon as the little thing landed on the ground, it turned around and rushed towards Dean. Dean's figure flashed as he dodged the little thing's attack. He was about to reach out his hand to stop it. Suddenly, its body that was pouncing forward stiffened and stopped. It fell to the ground in pain, its claws desperately clawing at the ground. It didn't last for 7 or 8 seconds before its body stopped moving. A lot of blood flowed out of its bloodshot eyes, mouth, ears, and other parts. It was dead. Dean was startled as his face turned gloomy. Considering the fierce effect of the God's marrows, he deliberately took out a drop and diluted it with water before injecting it. The effect of the marrows shouldn't be so strong that it would kill the little thing. This thing is poisonous. Dean felt a layer of goosebumps on his skin. He was just testing the waters. He even felt sorry for the 2 bottles of God's marrows that he had lost to Eugene. But he didn't expect that there was a problem with the marrows. Of course, there was a very small possibility that the little thing's body structure wasn't suitable to bear even a drop of God's marrows. Dean's face was gloomy and uncertain. He stared at the bleeding little thing on the ground. After a moment, he bent down to dig a hole in the ground and buried the little thing in it. After covering it with soil, he turned around and left. His expression returned to normal after he returned to his residence, but his heart was gloomy. If it was poisonous, it meant that the people in the dragon clan who wanted to harm him couldn't wait any longer. It was very dangerous to be a member of the dragon clan. He could die at any time outside the giant wall, but it was just a possibility. But the dragon clan wanted to increase the probability of this possibility to a necessity. The person who framed me must be the one who came in contact with the god's marrow. I can't investigate this with my current identity. I can't be sure if it's Aisha's supporters or Haley's people who did it. Dean thought quickly, but if I were Haley, I wouldn't do that. After all, in her eyes, my existence is an important chess piece. It's more likely that the people who supported Aisha did it. They want me to die and not implicate her. There was a trace of anger in his heart as he thought of this. Although he understood these people's way of doing things, but if he hadn't been deceived by Hathaway so many times in the prison and in the 9th area of the Dark Church, he wouldn't have been so vigilant after being deceived by Hathaway once. Without his vigilance, he would be completely screwed this time. It seems that the Dragon Clan doesn't want to let go of any opportunity to put me to death. Dean smiled as he greeted Eugene. He went back to his room and closed the door. The smile on his face disappeared as he looked at the box of God's marrows beside his bed. His heart was filled with anger and regret. He wouldn't use this batch of God's marrows again. This meant that he had lost the resources to enhance his strength. It seems that I can only rely on these parasitic soul worms. He looked at the 8 bottles next to the box. There was a parasitic soul worm in each bottle. These parasitic soul worms couldn't be kept for too long. At this moment, the 8 worms didn't feel as energetic as before. They were lazily lying in the bottle. Occasionally, they would move or gently wriggle. Relying on parasitic soul worms could be used as nourishment to enhance the physique. However, this method was too wasteful. After all, it was very difficult to encounter a named monster, let alone kill one. However, at this point, Dean couldn't care so much. Before going to Wasteland, he must enhance his strength as soon as possible so that his life would be more secure. After all, outside the giant wall, accidents could happen. Just like when he was just a scavenger in the area that had been cleaned by the hunters, he still encountered a powerful festie and almost lost his life. The probability of this kind of thing happening in the wasteland should be higher. Thinking of this, Dean came to the bed and picked up the weakest parasitic soul worm. He recognized that it was a parasitic soul worm that was named by the bloodthirster. If he used it as his magic mark, he would get the ability to control the blood and would be immune to certain toxins. Linda, who had died in his hands, had a similar magic mark. Dean took it out and put it into the syringe. He began to absorb it. There's a problem in the god's marrow. They shouldn't do anything to these parasitic soul worms. Moreover, it would be more complicated if they did something to the parasitic soul worms. Dean was a little relieved after absorbing these parasitic soul worms. Of course, if there was a problem with these parasitic soul worms, he could only admit defeat. Soon, the first parasitic soul worm was absorbed. Dean continued to absorb the second one. When he was captured by the Dragon Clan, he was close to the limit of the senior hunter's bottleneck. At this moment, after absorbing the first parasitic soul worm, he had completely reached the bottleneck state. The remaining 7 parasitic soul worms could be used as energy to activate the magic mark. The night was getting darker. 7 parasitic soul worms were injected into Dean's body one after another. The splitter's magic mark on his chest was still as black as ink. Its shape didn't change, and it didn't fill up. Dean could not help but wryly smile when he saw such a reaction. Last time when he evolved to Senior Hunter, he realized that the number and quality of parasitic soul worms needed to activate and evolve as legendary deified magic marks were higher than other magic marks. Now, it seemed that an ordinary rare magic mark only needed 8 rare parasitic soul worms as nourishment to activate it to become a primary limitless one. However, he reckoned that he would need a lot more. He might even need rare quality parasitic soul worms to have a stronger effect. However, rare parasitic soul worms were rare and hard to come by. Not to mention nourishment, they were even rare to be used as magic marks. It seems that it's far away to become a primary limitless being by relying on the cultivation of the dragon clan. Dean thought in his heart. This time he was given such rich resources, but next time he might not get them. He had to rely on his own merits to exchange for them. However, this method of using merit points to exchange for items and having people use items to exchange for merit points was nothing more than a method and trading system established by those in power to enslave workers. If one followed the rules, one would never be able to leave this circle, because the biggest beneficiary was always the terminal. He touched the magic mark on his chest and put on his clothes again. He sighed in his heart. He was probably the first person among the dragon guards to enter the wasteland as a senior hunter. He looked at the box in front of his feet. His eyes flashed slightly. The next day, dawn had just risen. Ian, the black man, Ruby, and another woman in black named Rosemary were sparring on the training ground behind the house. The newcomer, Eugene, was watching from the side while the other two were sleeping soundly in their respective rooms. Dean woke up and had breakfast. He came to the training ground to say hello to Ian. Ian saw Dean and jumped back to avoid Ruby's punch. "Little Dean, do you want to come and play?" "No, I haven't used up the god's marrow. I'll wait until I become a primary limitless being." Dean shrugged. "You guys play first. I'll go out." Black man Ruby tilted his head and grinned. "Little guy, you should learn from Eugene. You'll get used to being abused. People grow the fastest when they're abused. Don't you think so? I'm not a sadist." Dean turned around without looking back. Ruby laughed. He didn't notice that Dean didn't say masochist, but sadist. Dean could hear the sound of Ian and Ruby fighting behind him as he walked out of the training ground. He didn't stop as he went to the top of the mountain. He pretended to be careless as he took out the god's marrow from his clothes. He dropped it on the steps of the mountain or on the grass. These places were not hidden, but not very conspicuous. It seemed as if they were left behind. Dean continued to throw the god's marrows all over the mountain after strolling around. He met other dragon guard along the way, but they didn't take the initiative to greet him as they didn't know each other. He returned to his residence after throwing the god's marrow. He put the rest of the god's marrow into his clothes and put it all over the mountain. "Don't blame me if I can't find out who the dragon clan wants to kill me." Dean's eyes flashed coldly. As the saying goes, every debt has its debtor. But since he couldn't find the creditor, then he could only wait for the creditor to take the initiative to find him. As for the truly unlucky ones, they were the ones who picked up the god's elixir and used it because they were greedy for small gains. He knew that these people were innocent, but he still had to do it because it was beneficial to him. This thing was given by the dragon clan. Blame the dragon clan. His expression was calm as he leisurely returned to the training field. At this moment, the field was already filled with Eugene sparring with a woman in black named Rosemary. The woman's expression was cold, and her movements were direct and efficient. Eugene was so tired that he was sweating profusely, as if he was in the heat of summer. However, Rosemary was like an iceberg. Not a single drop of sweat could be seen on her body. Dean sat on the sidelines and looked at the battle. As the saying goes, the onlooker sees more clearly. Very soon, he saw the difference between the two of them. Eugene's movements were too big during the battle, which resulted in a waste of energy. Rosemary, on the other hand, was calm. Her attacks were straightforward and direct, without the slightest bit of sloppiness. The difference between her and Eugene was like heaven and earth. When people looked at her, they would feel that Eugene was very stupid. Dean knew that Eugene wouldn't have such a feeling if he only watched Eugene's battle. On the contrary, he would feel that Eugene's posture was a sharp deterrent. But Rosemary's contrast made him feel that Eugene was stupid. This gave him a hint of insight. It wasn't that he had to be straightforward in battle. This was a principle that he had long understood, but that he had to understand the contrast and contrast. This might be a simple principle, but if it was put to use, it would become a very sharp weapon. Light needs to be set off by darkness. Darkness also needs to be set off by light. Dean's eyes lit up as he thought of the holy church and the dark church in the outer wall. The monastery used such a simple truth that everyone understood. But when it came out, there would be two contrasting organizations. All the geniuses of the outer wall would join the Holy Church, while those who liked to be independent would choose to join the Dark Church. But no matter what, the mastermind behind all this was the Pope alone, as well as the monastery behind him. What are you thinking about? Ian sat down with a glass of water. Dean recovered and smiled. I feel that they are very powerful. Really? Ian looked at the two of them and said with a smile, You're talking about Mary, right? She's just playing. I asked her to practice with Eugene. After you absorb all the god's marrow in a few days, you can come and practice as well. Otherwise, your body's reaction won't match your mind's reaction. Dean nodded. Days passed by. Ian was getting more and more puzzled. On the 5th day, he finally heard the news from Ian. 2 members of the 13th squad were poisoned and were sent to the rescue center. They couldn't perform the next mission and had to be filled with new people. The news spread quickly as they lived on the same mountain. Other teams also knew about the matter. After hearing the news that Ian brought back, Ruby, Rosemary, and the others looked at each other with a strange expression on their faces. The dragon guards were poisoned? On this mountain, the only possibility of being poisoned was food poisoning, right? But how is that possible? If it wasn't, then it meant that someone intentionally poisoned them. Moreover, the possibility was higher. Chapter 5:15. Were they poisoned? Eugene looked around at the crowd and asked tentatively, Damn it, this kind of dirty thing actually happened again. Ruby looked angry. They haven't even set off yet, and they're already using dirty tricks to compete. These despicable people. Ian slightly frowned. Things haven't been investigated clearly, so don't jump to conclusions. If they were poisoned, then it's best not to leave the residents alone during this time, so as not to be tricked. Eugene glanced at him and said, They were probably poisoned by their teammates, right? Ian turned to look at him. What do you mean? Eugene looked at him cautiously and said, 2 people were poisoned at once and at the same time. If it was an outsider who poisoned them, it would be very difficult to succeed. Also, they were poisoned, so they would be sent to recuperate and new members would be added in. If the other members of their team are dissatisfied with these 2 people, then wouldn't it be better to use this method to kick them out? Upon hearing this, Ian, Ruby, and the others glanced at him and guessed what he meant. Ian shook his head slightly and said, You don't have to worry about anything. It's impossible for someone from the same team to poison them. That's because the people who filled in at the last minute are all rookies like you guys. As for your original teammates, you've worked with them at least once or twice, so you have some understanding of them. They are much better than rookies. Eugene let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, I was thinking too much. Ian ignored him and looked at Dean, who was silent next to him. Don't go out during this time. Stay in the residence and train well. Dean nodded. The next day, another person was poisoned. The news spread again. All the dragon guards who lived on the mountain became cautious and no longer went out for a walk alone. In the blink of an eye, the date of the expedition was near. On this day, a team suddenly arrived outside the residence of Team 7. The leader of the team was a short but strong man. He was no more than 1 meter tall and seemed to have dwarfism. However, his arms were large and his body was stocky. He carried 2 2-meter-long axes on his back like 2 black flags. He looked extremely domineering. Norwich was next to him. He took a step forward and shouted, Ian. Ian, who was enjoying lunch with the others in the living room, had already noticed the commotion outside. When he heard Norwich's voice, he frowned slightly and realized that something bad was about to happen. You guys eat first, he said and got up to open the door. When he saw the short, stocky man next to Norwich, his expression changed. He immediately bowed and said, Greetings, Deacon Tander. The short man coldly snorted, Get the kid named Dean out of your team. Ian was puzzled, but quickly nodded. He turned around and called out to Dean, who was eating in the living room. Dean had long sensed the aggressive group of people outside. He knew that the bait had finally caught the real big fish. He got up and walked out of the room. His gaze immediately fell on the short, stocky man beside Norwich. The man's body was surging with heat, even stronger than Ian's. Are you Dean? The short man looked up and down at Dean and said coldly, You are the one who poisoned the other teams these days, right? This time you have committed a big crime. Come back with me and prepare to serve your sentence." Ian, who was standing next to Dean, was stunned. Eugene and others in the room were also stunned. The poisoner who had caused such an uproar in the past few days was actually this newcomer in their team. Dean smiled. "Deacon Tan, I'm just a newcomer. Don't you think it's a good idea to wrongly accuse me?" "Well, evidence?" The short man's voice was cold. "I'll talk to you about evidence once you are in prison." Dean narrowed his eyes and smiled. "So, you don't have evidence. Since you don't have evidence, can you arrest people? Or are you going to confess under torture?" "Don't talk nonsense. Do you want me to personally capture you?" The short man scolded. Dean raised his eyebrows as he looked at Norwich, who was standing next to him. Norwich was aware of Dean's gaze. He was helpless in his heart. He wanted to observe Dean, but the attitude of the short man was too tough. He knew that there would be big trouble if he continued to watch the drama. He whispered, "Deacon Tander, Dean is a member of the Dragon Hall. You can't take him away if you don't have evidence." The short man was stunned and turned his head to look at him. Suddenly, he seemed to understand something. There was a trace of gloominess in his eyes as he said, "Elder Harley Ka wants to protect him?" Norwich helplessly replied, "This is the rule of the Dragon Hall. It has nothing to do with Elder Harley." The short man stared at him, snorted, and turned to look at Dean. "Do you want evidence? I'll give you evidence. You're also a senior hunter. Considering your low physique, the clan gave you a batch of resources. However, you poisoned the gods' marrows and scattered them all over the mountain. People picked them up and used them, causing them to be poisoned." Everyone was stunned as they heard his words. They looked at Dean in unison. They didn't expect the youth to be so scheming. Dean smiled. "Deacon Tander, you have wronged me. You have said that I have poisoned the gods' marrows and scattered them all over the mountain. The problem is that those who picked them up were poisoned. Do you mean that I have enmity with everyone on the mountain? I'm a newcomer who has just joined the Dragon Hall. I'm not familiar with the people on my team, let alone the others. Moreover, the gods' marrows are so precious. Why would I do such a thing? It's harmful to others and not beneficial to myself." The short man's face turned ugly. He realized that the evidence he had given was the truth, but it was tantamount to a lie if it didn't make sense logically. He didn't want to argue with Dean. As Dean had said, it was the simplest and most effective way to torture him. But he didn't expect that Elder Harley would protect Dean. Didn't that simple-minded fool know that Dean's existence was a hidden danger to Aisha? Ian and the others secretly nodded as they heard Dean's words. Indeed, they would never do such a thing unless Dean was a madman. But after these days of contact with Dean, Ian knew that Dean's mental state was very normal. This could only mean that Dean had offended someone. They had long since become accustomed to this sort of thing and were inured to it. The short man's eyes were gloomy as he saw everyone looking at him. He couldn't say anything about Dean's identity as it was related to the change of Saintess and the reputation of the former Saintess Aisha. He was the only one who knew about the poison in God's marrows, so he couldn't say it. He could say that Dean's smell was on the bottle, which could prove that the God's marrows were Dean's. But the smell could be added. As long as they could find Dean's clothes, then the God's marrow would be stained with his smell. Such evidence was too weak. Suddenly, he thought of something and his eyes lit up. He stared at Dean and sneered. "Evidence? Do you still have the God's marrow? Can you take it out?" Dean shrugged. "I've absorbed it." The short and strong man was waiting for this sentence. He sneered and said, "Finished absorbing? In other words, you have evolved into a primary limitless?" Dean understood his intention. He calmed down and said, "Yes." Chapter 516. Norwich was hesitant. He looked at Dudian. He saw Dudian's calm expression. He nodded. "All right, no problem." "Humph." The short man snorted and looked at Dean. "You heard my words. Now I'm going to test your strength. Are you ready?" Dudian smiled. "How was the test?" The short, stocky man sneered. Victory was in his grasp. He pointed to a person in the team behind him and said, "Moss, come out and fight with him." Mass was a calm young man. He nodded and stepped out of the queue. He said to Dean, "Punch me. I'm also a primary frontiersman. If your strength is comparable to mine, then you can prove yourself." Dean nodded and walked down the steps. At this time, Ruby, Eugene, and the others had already walked out of the room and were watching the test. Dean came in front of Maze. I'm going to punch. Come on. Maze put up a defensive posture. Whoosh. Dean's fist whistled as it swept out. The fist immediately smashed into Mass's raised arm. With a muffled bang, Mass's steady footsteps immediately swayed slightly. He couldn't help but take 2 steps back before he stopped. There was a faint red fist mark on his arm. The short man was startled as he saw the scene. He shook his numb hands. There was a trace of surprise in his heart. He felt that Dean's strength was stronger than him, a primary frontiersman. Is this okay? Dudian looked at the short man. The short, stout man came back to his senses, and his face darkened. How do you feel? He asked Thomas. Moss looked back at him with an ashamed expression. He lowered his head and said, I feel like my strength is on par with mine. The short man's eyes lit up as he heard Dudian's words. He was puzzled, but soon thought of a reason. Some of the magic marks could increase the strength of a human body. It's too one-sided to test the strength alone. There is also speed and reaction. The short man said, Maze, go and compare speed with him. Yes. Maze nodded. From here to the hillside steps. Let's see who gets there first. The short and stocky man pointed and said to the two, Get ready. Dean and Marcy immediately stood at his designated starting line. When the short and strong man shouted, the two of them exerted their strength and rushed out almost at the same time. At the same time, Dean felt the wind whistling in his face. It was a kind of carefree feeling, but his vision always fell on Mouse next to him, lest he accidentally ran to his heart's content and get rid of him. Soon, under his control, the two of them arrived at almost the same time. Seeing this result, the short man's face became extremely ugly. There were magic marks that increased strength and speed, but there were very few magic marks that increased both at the same time. How to measure the reaction? Dean trotted back and asked the short man. The short, stocky man looked at him deeply, turned around and said, There's no need to test. Dean saw that he was about to leave and immediately said, So, can you prove that I am not the one who poisoned you? The corner of the short man's mouth twitched. He clenched his fists and walked away in big strides. Norwich smiled helplessly as he looked at the angry man leave. He waved to Dean and Ian and followed the short man. There was still a smile on Dean's face as he watched them leave, but his eyes gradually turned cold. It was obvious that this person was the one who poisoned him in the god's marrow. Maybe he was one of the people who poisoned him. In any case, the person who poisoned him couldn't get away from him. Ian and others came over while Dean was secretly remembering the name of this person. Little do, you seem to have offended someone. Ian looked at him with a meaningful look. Dean looked back at him and nodded. It seems so. Ruby patted his shoulder. Don't worry about anything. No one can say that you are guilty as long as you are innocent. So what if I offend a few people? Who doesn't offend a few F***king despicable people in their lives? Dean didn't expect the rough man to comfort him. He smiled. Yes. What do you mean, yes? Ruby emphasized in a loud voice. Ian smiled and said, You should have said that earlier. Ruby was speechless. He scratched his head and said, Wasn't that person here just now? Everyone burst into laughter. This little episode passed quickly, and everyone returned to their previous state. As the deadline of the mission was approaching, even Luna and Martin, who rarely went out to exercise, went to the training ground every day to exercise. Although they didn't use their full strength, but they could restore their combat sensitivity. 15 days passed in the blink of an eye. Norwich came to the residence early in the morning and issued tasks to everyone. Listen, this time your task location is Orange Wasteland. Norwich glanced at the scroll. The main task is to hunt down a silencer in Orange Wasteland number 3. The reward is 700 medals, and the person who kills it will get 60% of the reward. In addition, there are 3 additional tasks. There is no need to talk about the first and second points. The third point is to find the real body of the mysterious footprints in Orange Wasteland number 3 or provide clues. The reward ranges from 500 to 3,000 medals. If you find the real body of the mysterious footprints, you will be rewarded 3,000 medals, and the person who finds it will get 60% of the reward. Ian, Ruby, and the others were dumbfounded. Rosemary, who had always been quiet, couldn't help but ask, "The reward of the third additional task is so much? Is it more than the main task? What is the origin of the mysterious footprints?" Norwich shrugged. "Not long ago, there was a team that carried out a task in Orange Wasteland number 3 and brought back some news. As for the origin of the footprints, we don't know. But according to the Monster Research Institute, there is no such footprints recorded in the Atlas of Monsters. It is likely to be a newly evolved species or a monster that came out from the depths of the wasteland." Ian and others were startled. Their faces turned pale as they came to their senses. If this thing left footprints in Orange Wasteland number 3, then wouldn't it be very dangerous? Ruby couldn't help but ask. Norwich said, "It's hard to say. That thing may have left. Moreover, if it is a newly evolved species, then it will be very strong. The possibility of it coming out from the depths of the wasteland is not big, so you don't have to worry about it. Of course, it's better to be cautious." Ian and others looked at each other with heavy hearts. Chapter 517. Norwich glanced at him, smiled, and said, "You can ask your captain about this." He handed the scroll to Ian. "This is the pattern of the mysterious footprint and the mission record. As for the rest of the rules, I don't need to tell you in detail." "No." Ian took the scroll and watched Norwich leave. He bowed his head and opened the scroll. Ruby, Eugene, and Luna immediately looked at the scroll. On the scroll, there was a 3-clawed footprint in the shape of a Y. The first 2 slender footprints branched off, while the last one was a slightly shorter one. Below the footprints, there was an extremely detailed drawing of the wasteland ruins, and the footprints were deeply embedded in the ground. Next to the footprints was a measuring line. The 2 front claws were 7 centimeters long, and the back claws were 3 centimeters long. The total length was 1 meters. It was equivalent to half the body length of an ordinary person. The width was 6 centimeters, and the depth of the footprint was 3 centimeters. These data showed a lot of information about the monster. "Martin, what kind of monster do you think it is?" Ian asked Martin, who was next to him. Martin stared at the pattern on the scroll. "I have never seen it before, but from the shape of the claws, it should be a crawling monster. Most of the crawling monsters are cold-blooded monsters. They like to stay in sticky and wet places." Eugene was curious. "Why is it a crawling monster? Aren't there a lot of monsters with claws like this?" Martin glanced at him and frowned slightly. He was a little impatient with these ignorant newbies, but now that the mission was imminent, he couldn't be bothered to argue with him. He coldly said, "This can be observed from the height of the footsteps. If it's not a crawling monster, then it should be an upright monster. Based on the size of the footprints, its height and size should be very shocking, so the footprints left behind shouldn't be so shallow." Eugene came to a realization and kept nodding. Ian stared at the footprints for a while. He put away the scroll and said to everyone, "Well, if you have anything to say, then we will talk on the way. Time is pressing. Go change your equipment and get ready to go. Remember to bring supplies. If we find the mysterious footprints, then we may be able to complete the additional mission. But it will take a lot of time. We must not cut off our supplies." "Yes." Everyone obeyed. After returning to their rooms, they put on the equipment they had prepared beforehand. Dean and Eugene received the basic standard equipment of the Dragon Guards. It was a set of dark armor. The material was like metal, but also like plastic. It firmly wrapped the body. The collar, wrists, knees, and other places of the armor were embedded with glittering crystals. Dean had seen this crystal from Hathaway's wrist. It was a meteorite that could isolate the high-intensity radiation outside the wall. In addition to the basic armor, both of them also had basic weapons. Dean reported his occupation as an archer and received a bow. The bow's entire body was flowing silver, its lines extremely beautiful, but the 2 ends of the bow were very sharp, like 2 strange teeth, and the bowstring was dark red, like a full blood vessel. The pulling force was extremely strong, and even with his strength, he needed 60 to 70% of his strength to pull the bow to its full circle. Although it was a basic weapon, it was considered an extremely powerful divine weapon for the dragon guards. After putting on the equipment, the rest was the supplies. It was a very sturdy black bag. The material was like glue, waterproof, and thermal insulation. It was filled with 12 food boxes and 2 bottles of purified water. Dean estimated that the supplies were enough for a primary limitless to eat and drink for 12 days. If he was frugal, then it would be enough for half a month. He didn't care too much about the food. After all, he had spent 3 years of scavenger training. He knew how to find food and water outside the giant wall. Hunters and dragon guards wouldn't waste time to learn this knowledge. Instead of wasting time learning how to survive, it was better to spend the time learning how to fight. They could increase their strength and finish the task faster. As for survival, no matter how much they struggled, once they encountered a powerful monster, it would be a dead end. Soon, everyone was fully equipped. Dean soon saw Ruby in the team. He was carrying a huge bag full of water and food. The amount of food he carried was much more than their standard amount. The amount of food in this bag was comparable to the total amount of food carried by the other 6 people. Dean understood Ian's intention. Carrying too much food outside the giant wall would slow down their movement speed. But they weren't acting alone. They were a team. Therefore, Ruby's main responsibility in the early stage was to take care of the food. The fighting could be handed over to the others. This was the efficiency of the team. When it was time to set off, everyone had one last meal before leaving the Dragon Clan. Ian led the team to ride the dragon horse that was specially trained by the Dragon Clan. They went to the passage outside the giant wall. "Captain, how long are we going to go? When will we come back?" Eugene asked Ian. Ian said, "The reward for the main mission this time is quite high. It's 700. You can come back when you finish the mission. Otherwise, we will deduct 700 merit points. If we split it evenly among everyone, we will deduct 100 merit points. 100 merit points isn't much. We're going to perform such a dangerous task and only get so little merit points. The higher-ups are too stingy," Eugene complained. Ian looked at him. 100 merit points is not bad. We can exchange a lot of things with it. Eugene looked at the strange-looking saber on his waist and asked curiously, "Like this saber of yours?" Ian smiled faintly and said, "This blood drinker is worth more than 100 merit points. This weapon was forged from the front teeth of a level 52-foot flat tooth beast. When I exchanged for it, I spent 850 merit points." "So much?" Eugene was speechless. "What's so special about this sword? It can cut iron like mud? My saber seems to be able to do the same." Ruby rolled his eyes as he heard Eugene's ignorance. "What's the use of your broken sword? It can't cut through monsters that are above level 50. Cut iron like mud? What's the big deal about iron? The skin and scales of these monsters are many times harder than iron. Moreover, a broken knife like yours would break under the claws of these monsters. Do you know how hard it is?" Eugene heard him choke and was stunned for a moment before he came to a realization. Dean felt strange in his heart. Although Eugene was a newcomer, it seemed that he didn't know anything about the battles outside the giant wall. Had he never been outside the giant wall? "Captain," Eugene suddenly thought of something and asked curiously, "What are the first and second additional missions that person mentioned?" Ian held the reins and galloped through the wilderness. Without turning his head, he said, "The first and second additional missions are old missions. Almost every time we carry out a mission, these 2 additional missions are there. They are permanent missions. The first additional task is to find relics or ruins. As long as you provide clues or directly provide the coordinates of the ruins, then you'll get a huge amount of merit points. The second task is to collect a plant called dragon grass. It is said that it is the dragon worm's favorite food. Each dragon grass can be exchanged for 10 merit points." Eugene was taken aback and asked, "A relic from the ancient era? What was a relic from an ancient era? Are they the ruins outside the giant wall?" Ian replied, "Of course not. Those ruins have been scrapped. Even the copper and iron in the ruins have been corroded by the rain. What we're looking for are the remains of human corpses or items that haven't been damaged in the past. These ruins are generally sealed and hidden in the ground or in some mountains. Chapter 5:18. Dean, who was riding at the back of the team, was startled as he heard Ian's words. He remembered the news that he had seen on TV. At the beginning of the disaster, governments around the world built shelters at major city gates. Young women and children were the first to migrate into shelters. In addition to these women and children, there were also well-known intellectuals, writers, scientists, and famous university professors and other social celebrities. At that time, because of such classification and selection, it caused a lot of backlash from ordinary people. Some of them came out to lead the public opinion and accused the government of unfair behavior. Under the guidance of these people, many people became disheartened and became thugs. They burned and looted. They created a lot of trouble, but were directly suppressed and killed by the armed police. At that time, the laws of various countries changed with the state of global war preparedness. Some of the people who made illegal comments on the network were directly targeted and killed. There was no room for maneuver. They weren't brought back for supervision and education as usual. These ancient-era ruins, are they referring to these shelters? Dean's eyes flashed. He still remembered the news broadcast on TV at that time. Many country shelters were directly destroyed because the construction was not hidden enough or because of some accident exposure. The remaining shelters were estimated to survive the final disaster. It was estimated that very few shelters could survive the final disaster. Although he did not know what happened in the end, he could tell from the world after he woke up that some of his father's words had come true. All the nuclear bombs in the world had been used. Otherwise, the sky today would not be covered by nuclear dust, and even the rain contained nuclear radiation. Moreover, he had been asleep for 300 years, although he was not sure how long it took for the nuclear disaster to break out after he fell asleep. But from the ruins of the buildings outside the giant wall, it could be seen that even if it wasn't 300 years, it wasn't far away. After such a long time, the nuclear dust still hadn't dissipated. The Earth's environment was still so bad. It could be seen how terrifying the number of nuclear bombs that exploded was. It was enough to blow up the entire Earth. If a nuclear bomb is triggered in the end, those who hid in the sanctuaries back then would not be able to escape death, Hansen said. Dean's thoughts drifted away. Staying in the shelters would mean death. They would starve to death. If they left the shelters, then the Earth wouldn't be suitable for survival. After so many years of recuperation plus the Earth's self-healing ability, the nuclear radiation in the air is still so strong. If it was 100 years ago, then the nuclear radiation outside could easily kill an adult. If these people survived, then there would be a continuation of civilization. Dean thought of the giant wall. There was a trace of thought in his mind. The giant wall was also a shelter. Moreover, it was more solid than the shelters he had seen on TV. It was not so much a shelter, but a defensive barrier. He couldn't confirm whether the barrier was built by the world government or by the survivors after the disaster. However, from the additional task of the Dragon Clan, it could be seen that the Dragon Clan was looking for the things of the old civilization. They wanted to get the fire of the old civilization. Only enough benefits can drive the actions of the people in power. Dean thought in his heart, if the Dragon Clan didn't taste the sweetness, then they would never issue such an additional task to every Dragon Clan guard. Thinking about this, Hansen suddenly felt an urge to find a shelter he had once lived in. He wanted to see what it was like inside and see the people who were wearing the same clothes as him. Eugene looked at Ian curiously. Will there be a lot of merit rewards if we find the ruins? Ian nodded. The reward is high, but the probability of completion is very small. It's like the probability of winning the grand prize. So don't have any expectations. If we can find it by chance, we'll be lucky. If we deliberately look for it, we'll probably have to stay in the barren area for a year and a half and still not see it. Moreover, it's another matter whether we can survive there for that long. Eugene smiled and said, so it's all about luck in the outside world. Luck is the key, but not everyone has it. On the other side, Rosemary, who was dressed in tight-fitting black clothes that accentuated her curvaceous figure, said calmly, but strength is controllable, and it's more trustworthy. Martin, who was riding beside Ian, said, "The giant wall is in front of us. Get ready." Luna chuckled, "Don't talk too much. It's one of the ways to save physical strength. Little Gold, you should learn from Little Dean." Eugene smiled. "Don't call me Little Gold. It's weird. But I like gold. The light of gold is the most beautiful." Luna laughed. Eugene's eyes lit up as he heard Luna's words. Luna looked at him with a smile. "If you can come back alive this time, this sister will accompany you to play." Hearing this, Eugene was slightly excited and said, "Just because of this, I will definitely be able to survive." It didn't take long for them to arrive in front of the towering giant wall. The dragon territory itself was located in a remote area. The dragon horse's speed was also very fast. After leaving the dragon territory, they directly entered the wilderness suburbs. At this moment, it only took them less than half an hour to reach the giant wall. Everyone stopped talking and laughed as they looked at the towering wall. The atmosphere of the team gradually became serious. There was a passage in front of the giant wall. There were 2 teams of knights wearing golden armors at the entrance of the passage. All of them were wearing dragon badges. Ian dismounted first and handed the reins to a knight. He showed his Dragon Guard medal to a middle-aged knight and said, "We are the 7th Dragon Guard team. We are on a mission. Please open the door." The middle-aged man had expected it when he saw the dragon horse they were sitting on. He checked the medals of Dudian and the others. After confirming that there were no mistakes, he waved to the guard to open the door of the passage. Ian took the lead and went in. Martin, Ruby, Rosemary, and others followed behind him. After entering the underground tunnel, he passed through a long, dark corridor and arrived at the other end of the tunnel. As the door was pushed open, Dudian was surprised to find that there were dragon guards stationed at the entrance of the passage. But there were only 4 of them. Their armor was smeared with plant slurry for simple camouflage. Chapter 519. Dean looked back at the giant wall. According to the previous route, he was on the west side of the giant wall. He had to go straight to the left side to reach the outer wall area. At the intersection of the western corner and along the northern side of the giant wall was the giant wall passage. He could find Sergei there. "I have to find a way to meet Sergei on the way back." Dean's eyes lit up. He wanted to continue the experiment of his new invention, but it wasn't feasible in the 9th region. He had to transport the materials outside the giant wall and establish a stronghold outside the giant wall to produce the new invention. Although some of the molds made before would be invalid, but he had the previous experience, so the time for the second production would be greatly shortened. Moreover, he was ready to secretly build an experimental factory in the slums if he continued to produce the new invention. He needed an open and secret place to produce the new invention. Now it seemed that the desolate area outside the giant wall was obviously more suitable than the slums. Moreover, he didn't need to worry about the harm caused by environmental pollution, which would attract the attention of other forces. "Keep up. Shout your ability is thermal vision. If you sense any monsters, remember to warn us." Ian and Martin walked in front of the team with dignified expressions. From the moment they entered the giant wall, it meant that they were completely isolated from the safe environment. They could encounter danger at any time. Even if they were so close to the giant wall, they could still encounter extremely powerful monsters. Dean nodded as he came to the middle of the team. His pupils contracted as he observed the surroundings with thermal vision. During the 15-day preparation period, the members of the team exchanged their abilities. After all, everyone needed to cooperate with each other and perform their respective duties outside the giant wall to carry out the task. Dean's ability was thermal vision, so Ian positioned him as the auxiliary perceptor of the team. Eugene, who could toughen his skin, was in the role of combat and defense. Others were given different tasks according to their abilities. There is a monster at 3:00 direction, 4 miles ahead. There are 4 monsters at 3:00 direction. They seem to be sickle zombies. Dean reported the situation to the team. Ian asked in a low voice, "What is their general strength?" "Hunting level 20 to 25, Dean said. "Eugene, go and kill them." Ian ordered. Eugene was surprised why. Ian looked at him. "What do you mean, why?" Eugene scratched his head as he saw everyone looking at him. Aren't you stronger than me? Why should I go alone? What if Dean's perception is wrong? It's easy to deviate from judging the monster's physique by heat alone. Just go. Martin, who had a cold temper, snorted. If there's anything wrong with your perception, we'll support you immediately. But Eugene was reluctant. Ian frowned and said patiently, Eugene, we need to conserve our strength before we enter the third orange wasteland. You newbies can practice with some small monsters. If you're worried, you can go with Dew. Ian frowned and said patiently, Eugene, we need to conserve our strength before we enter the third orange wasteland. Hearing his words, Eugene hesitated for a moment, but in the end, he sighed and rushed over with his sword. Dean didn't follow. As Ian said, he also needed to conserve his physical strength. After all, the only thing he could rely on outside the giant wall was his own strength. After a moment, when Dean and others kept up with the same speed, Eugene's battle was over. Eugene's sword was back to its sheath, stained with blood. There were several corpses lying on the ground. As Dean had perceived, all of them were undeads with sickle arms. One of the undeads had a slightly protruding horn on its forehead. It seemed to be a mutated sickle undead's. Let's go. Ian didn't stop. He continued to move along the route. Eugene returned to the team and silently followed. There was silence along the way. Little Gold, I know what you're thinking. Luna leaned close to Eugene. You don't have to worry about anything. Newcomer's physical strength is specialized in clearing obstacles. We will protect you when you run out of physical strength. Eugene looked at her and smiled bitterly. I understand. Luna continued. We won't abandon anyone. Even from the point of view of benefits, we don't want to do so. There is a rule that every time we lose a member, 10% of the medal reward will be deducted. So you don't have to worry about anything. There's such a rule? Eugene was surprised. It seems that the higher-ups are very thoughtful. Of course, even if they didn't think of it in the beginning, they would have thought of it after a few accidents. Luna chuckled. While the two were talking, Dean reported several locations where the monsters were hiding. Ian saw that the monsters in these locations were far away from their route. Their level wasn't high. All of them were level 30 or below, so he didn't ask Eugene to hunt them. Dean was observing the surrounding monsters while recording the route. Since the mission was dangerous, he naturally had to be prepared for the team to be annihilated. In case Ian and the others died, he would have to rely on himself to remember the route to return. As they gradually went deeper into the wilderness ruins, large sections of the city outline appeared in Dean's line of sight. Broken high-rise buildings, mosses and vines covered supermarkets, broken asphalt roads, and crash cars were scattered in the middle of the road. The street lights at the intersection had long been broken. They fell powerlessly on the street and were slowly eroded by dust and moss. There were footprints and puddles on the road. There were also black nuclei of snow. The melting speed of the black snow was relatively slow due to the cold wind. There were still thick layers of snow in many places. It looked quite gloomy and dark. We will reach the orange wasteland after about 80 kilometers. Ian turned to Luna and said, Do you still have your scent? Did you sense any large monsters? Luna shook her head. The smell is still there. It hasn't been destroyed. Ian nodded. He looked at Dean. Report to me as soon as you sense any movement. Do you understand? Dean nodded. He looked at Luna. Her ability was also a kind of perception ability, but it was different from simple perception. Her ability had the effect of luring enemies. Her body could secrete urine with a special smell. This urine could be used as a road sign to mark the area. It could also lure some high-level monsters. These monsters would mistake it for the smell of their favorite food. Once the smell was destroyed, it meant that there was a high-level monster. Of course, this was only one of Luna's abilities. Her speed was increased by her ability, so she couldn't be underestimated. She was far better than people with the same physique. In addition, her sense of smell was also very sensitive. It could be said that she was the trump card of this team. Take a break and replenish your physical strength. We will enter the wasteland soon. Ian said. Everyone stopped. Ruby put down the huge backpack on his back and untied it. He took out food and water from it and handed it to the people who came to collect it. His food was the priority, and the food in each person's backpack was the last supply. From the giant wall to here, they had been rushing for the whole morning, although they had eaten before departure. But they had been in a state of tension along the way. Their bodies had consumed a lot of energy. They were a little hungry. Soon, everyone finished eating. It only took them less than 5 minutes to finish, and that included rest time. Chapter 520. Wait! Luna raised her hand as they were about 35 miles away from the wasteland. Everyone's heart trembled, and they stopped in their tracks. Ian turned his head to look at her with a serious expression. He asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" "There's a smell of blood." Luna gently sniffed and frowned. "It's coming from the 10 o'clock direction. It should be the smell of human blood." "Human blood?" Everyone was shocked. Eugene whispered, "Is there another team in front?" "It's possible." Ian's eyes lit up. He looked at Luna. "Can you smell the smell of a monster?" "There's a damp and fishy smell. It should be left by a monster," Luna said. Ian pondered for a moment. "Let's go and take a look." Everyone looked at each other, but no one objected. They controlled their footsteps and sneaked towards the place that Luna had pointed out. Dean used thermal vision to carefully observe the surroundings. In addition to some mice and small monsters in the ruins, he didn't see any high-level monsters with dazzling heat. They arrived at the place that Luna had pointed out after more than 10 minutes. It was a wide square. Several towering buildings had collapsed, and only half of them were left standing. The windows of the buildings were broken and the concrete had faded. It looked like a shriveled skeleton. The place where the smell of blood came from was an open space on the side of the square. Everyone confirmed that the surrounding environment was safe. They quietly approached the place. They saw a young man lying on the ground. He was wearing the basic armor of the Dragon Guards. Only the lower half of his head was left. His eyes were gone from the nose bridge. His brain was scattered on the ground. There was a huge wound on his chest. Everyone's face slightly changed as they saw the tragic scene. Dean frowned. From the color of the blood and the softness of the brain, it could be seen that the person had died less than half an hour ago. In other words, he had died 20 minutes ago. He quickly looked around and immediately saw a few sharp claw marks on the ground. In addition, a few moss-covered cars had been overturned, and some had crashed into the walls of the square, leaving a few wet tire marks on the ground. Martin suddenly squatted down and looked at the dragon tattoo on a man's arm. He tore it open and saw the name embroidered on the back of the dragon tattoo. His expression changed, and he whispered, "It's Tommy, the quick blade of the 5th Squad." Ruby was surprised. "Tommy? How is this possible? He actually died here? This is not the barren area." Ian looked at the body for a while, and then looked around. His eyes were vigilant and solemn. He said in a low voice, "He must have been chased by something from the wasteland. He couldn't shake it off, so he was killed." Luna looked at Duddian. "Did you see anything?" "No," Duddian replied. Luna said to Ian, "We can't stay here for long. We have to leave immediately." Ian nodded and looked at the corpse on the ground. He sighed and said, "Mary, burn his body. Don't leave it to those filthy monsters." "Yes." Rosemary took out kerosene from her pocket and was ready to light it. Duddian quickly said, "Don't." The others looked at him. Duddian said, "He died not long ago, so the monster shouldn't have gone far. If it is a cold-blooded monster, then I'm afraid that it will be stimulated if we light a fire here." Rosemary's face turned cold. "There are 7 of us here. Even if it appears we can deal with it. Moreover, we can help Tommy to get revenge. What are you afraid of?" Eugene said, "I think Dudian's words are reasonable. Although we can deal with a monster, but shouldn't we save our physical strength? Isn't it not cost-effective to waste our physical strength for such a thing?" Rosemary opened her mouth to speak, but Ian raised his hand to stop her. There was a trace of complex color in his eyes. "Duddian is right. We shouldn't stay here for long. Let's go." Rosemary was startled as she looked at the corpse on the ground. She put away the kerosene in her hand and left with the team. Not long after the crowd left, 2 dark red lights slowly appeared in the shadow of a dilapidated building. The monster didn't eat Tommy, it just killed him. Tommy must have angered it, so it killed him to vent its anger. Martin analyzed to Ian in a low voice as they moved forward. His words were also heard by the rest of the team. Ian nodded with a serious look in his eyes. Generally, high-level demonic creatures are territorial and won't easily stray too far from their territory. However, this demonic creature chased him all the way here. This is very scary. Yes. Martin narrowed his eyes. It should be a monster that specializes in hunting other monsters. It has a weak territorial nature. Wherever there is food, that is its territory. I hope we won't meet it. Ian looked back at Dudian. Fortunately, you reacted quickly. Otherwise, we would have gotten into unnecessary trouble. Our losses would be very big. Dudian smiled as he saw Ian praise him, but his mood was dignified. He noticed that the impact of the battle wasn't big. It showed that the battle ended quickly. It showed that the monster that killed Tommy had the absolute power to crush Tommy. But it let Tommy run out of the wasteland. It was very unusual. Dudian could only think of one possibility. That was that the monster used Tommy as a bait. During the chase, they wanted him to escape back to his territory so that they could capture him in one fell swoop. If that was the case, then it showed that the monster's IQ was very high. The only advantage that humans had over monsters was wisdom. If the monster's wisdom wasn't inferior to humans, then humans wouldn't have any capital to fight against monsters. It didn't take long for the team to reach the wasteland. Dean and Eugene wouldn't have known that they were in the wasteland if it wasn't for Ian's explanation. This wasteland was similar to the areas outside. It was still a desolate ruin, but it looked more dilapidated. Other than that, there was no difference. There were no boundaries or signs on the ground. There's the smell of worm powder here. The higher the level of the monster, the more afraid they are of the smell of worm powder. Ian explained to Dean and Eugene. Dean had heard of the godworm powder before. He gently sniffed and smelled a strange smell floating in the air. At first, it was very stinky, but after a while, he felt that the stench slowly became fragrant. In the end, the more he smelled, the more comfortable he felt, as if the pores of his whole body were relaxing. Suddenly, he felt some creeping movement and coldness from his left shoulder. It seemed that the ice blood was flowing gently in his left shoulder. Chapter 5:21. Since the advanced monsters are afraid of the worm powder, then why don't we carry some with us? Wouldn't we be able to avoid encountering advanced monsters? Eugene asked curiously. I'll tell you after we leave this place. Ian said in a dignified tone. Everyone get ready to move at full speed into the wasteland. Then he winked at Martin, and the two of them took the lead. They quickly crossed the border and entered the wasteland, moving forward in a straight line. Dean's eyes lit up as he followed them. He noticed that in the vicinity of the divine worm powder, there were quite a few red heat spots, especially in the soil, in the wreckage of the ruins, and in the dense grasses. Luna, Dean, report immediately if there is any situation, Ian said in a low voice. Luna and Dean nodded and followed behind them. They were in the middle of the team. Ruby, Rosemary, and Eugene were at the back of the team to protect Dean and Luna. In the wilderness, the team would focus on protecting the teammates who had good perception. There are monsters at 2:30. There are monsters at 10:00. On the way, Dean constantly reported the location of the monsters he would encounter along the way. As for the monsters that were farther away, there was no need to report them. In the blink of an eye, they had been in the wasteland for 7 or 8 minutes. Although they would occasionally encounter monsters, they would choose to take a detour, but they were still more than 30 kilometers away from the border. Ian and Martin led the team to reduce their speed. Their physical consumption was relatively large, so they needed to recover in time to maintain the best state. After slowing down, Ian took the time to answer Eugene's question. Although the divine worm powder can repel high-level monsters, it is a fatal temptation to ordinary monsters. Usually, a large number of ordinary monsters gather near the border. Of course, the ordinary monsters aren't the level 7 or 8 monsters that inhabit the green wasteland, but the ordinary monsters in our area. Eugene was startled for a moment before he understood. He rolled his eyes and said, "If that's the case, Can't we use the divine worm powder as bait to make a trap to catch all these demonic creatures in one fell swoop? This way, the speed at which we clear out the monsters should be many times faster. Ian nodded and said, "The idea is good. Some people have thought about it, but it is very difficult to make a trap that can kill monsters above level 30. The materials needed are too many. The risk of transporting these materials from the giant wall is too great. Little Do should be clear about this. You are a hunter, so you should have learned how to make traps, right?" Dean replied, "Yes, if it's just to make traps to kill level 10 monsters, then using the resources in the wilderness, I can barely do it." The so-called trap was nothing more than using the destructive power of the surrounding environment to deal with the enemy. In this wilderness, if you want to make a trap, you can only dig a pit or throw a boulder. But such a trap will have a great impact on monsters above level 30. This is also the reason why the hunter profession is not popular among senior hunters. At the limitless level, the role of the hunter profession is reduced because of the environment and the monsters they encounter. They can only cooperate with teammates and sneak arrows from the back. They can't fight alone, and they don't have the ability to be the core of the team. Glenn was an archer at the beginning, but she successfully transformed into an assassin when she reached senior hunter level. Combined with her Black Weaver magic mark ability, she could ambush and assassinate. In the wilderness, she could often lead a team to survive. She could hunt monsters that were much stronger than her own physique. But Dean was still a traditional hunter. He used bow and arrow to fight. He was at a disadvantage in terms of weapons. The higher the physique of an archer was, the higher the requirements for the bow. After all, it wasn't about the accuracy, but the penetrating power of the arrow. Accuracy was the basic requirement for a limitless hunter. As for the penetrating power, it all depended on the bow. However, this was only the value of the traditional hunter in this world. Dean had already taken these factors into account when he chose the bow and arrow. For him, there were many ways to trap and kill level 30 monsters or even higher. However, these methods were not suitable to be used in front of Ian and the others as it was easy to expose his details. Moreover, Ian continued, the worm powder has always been managed by the top management. Even deacon-level characters can't touch the worm powder, let alone ordinary dragon guards like us. Eugene was speechless. Since this thing is so precious, how much did they directly sprinkle it at the border? Isn't it too wasteful? Ian shrugged. Do you think that is a waste to use resources to cast the giant wall? Hearing that, Eugene immediately understood. The boundary formed by the divine insect powder was like an invisible wall that blocked all high-level magical beasts. Therefore, no matter how much divine insect powder was spent, it wouldn't hurt. However, if it was given to people like them, it would be too extravagant. Captain, why don't we go back and secretly get some worm powder? Eugene's eyes turned. As long as we seal it up, then the smell won't leak. In case we encounter a high-level monster, we can use it. Wouldn't it be a free trump card? It's useless. Ian shook his head. Although the high-level monsters hate the smell of worm powder, but it doesn't mean that it can stop them. Otherwise, there wouldn't be monsters sneaking out of the wasteland. When we encountered a high-level magical creature and attracted its attention, even the smell of the divine worm powder wouldn't be able to dispel its desire to hunt us. It was just like how we hated dirty places filled with feces. But if there was gold and treasures in those places, would we still hate them? We will endure the disgust and pick out the things inside. Eugene was startled. He smiled bitterly and said, "Looks like I was happy for nothing. If you can think of it, others can too. No one is a fool." Martin, who was walking beside Ian, said coldly. Eugene smiled but didn't speak. "I left a mark in front of us. It disappeared," Luna suddenly said. Ian and Martin stopped in their tracks and turned to look at her. Ian asked, "How far is it?" "About 20 miles in the direction of 11 o'clock. Luna frowned and shook her head. "It may have been washed away by the rain. After all, I left the mark during the last mission. It was almost half a year ago." Ian's eyes were dignified. "Don't be careless. Your mark won't be washed away by the rain." Luna asked, "Why don't we take a detour?" Ian pondered for a moment as he looked around. They were surrounded by ruins of the city. They could see the outline of dark green mountains in the distance. The sky was foggy and the humidity was high. The Wind Listener is a rare monster in the Monster Illustrated book. Ian frowned. It has a keen hearing and is a rock attribute monster. It can drill into the earth and hide underground. According to the Monster Illustrated book, it likes to live in soft and humid areas. It likes to eat rotten things, including rotten plant leaves. But it likes rotten flesh and corpses the most. This area is the western part of the Third Orange Wasteland. It's also a rather humid area. It should be lurking somewhere around this ruined city. Martin nodded. It will be difficult for us to find it. We can only follow the old rules and let it come out to find us. But it is easy to attract other monsters with similar taste. Everyone get ready for battle. Ian nodded slightly and glanced at a tall building nearby. He immediately climbed up from the outside of the tall building. The tall building was covered with vines and looked as if it was supported by vines. He climbed to the top of the building and looked at it for a while. Then he returned downstairs and said to everyone, "Go to the west. The fog is thicker there." He took the lead and walked forward. Dean and Luna followed him and were responsible for guiding the way. Along the way, they avoided some scorching hot monsters. Occasionally, they encountered some undead or level 10 monsters. Ian led the team to kill them or shake them off. He didn't deliberately hunt them. Dean followed the team and experienced the work of the Dragon Guards. He suddenly understood why there were still so many monsters in the wasteland outside the giant wall. Now the reason was clear. The pioneers were only responsible for killing high-level monsters, and the Lemmeter was only responsible for hunting monsters. As for the rest of the monsters, they were too lazy to pay attention to them. It would waste unnecessary physical energy. In the end, these demonic creatures survived and multiplied more and more. Hey, when they passed the corner of the ruined street, they saw a monster pointed out by Dean. Ian was surprised when he saw its appearance. He turned and smiled. It is a rare monster in the growth period named cytoplasmic worm. Our luck is good. When they saw the monster, there was a trace of smile on their faces. A rare monster named parasitic soulworm could be exchanged for 200 medals. If it was a rare monster, it could be exchanged for 1,000 medals. Eugene, Dean, which one of you is going to kill it? Ian laughed. Hurry up. Don't let it run away. Eugene said excitedly, I'll go. Then he lifted his sword and rushed forward. This cytoplasmic being in its growth stage had a hunting level between 18 and 25. Its body was humanoid, but it had a few head-like sarcomas. Each sarcoma was covered with stinky mucus that oozed a pale yellow liquid like bile. Its sharp claws were uneven like tree branches, but they were very sharp. It stood crookedly, looking extremely terrifying. If it was a complete cytoplasmic worm, its hunting level would reach 57. It could easily kill a senior Lemmeter, but this one needed to go through 2 more transformations. Seeing Eugene pounce, the cytoplasmic worm opened its mouth and roared. The center of its abdomen cracked open with sharp teeth. Its body suddenly shot out to meet Eugene. Eugene was agile and easily dodged the cytoplasm being's frontal attack. As he brushed past the cytoplasm being, he swung his sword backhandedly and cut the cytoplasm being's body. Yellow blood spurted out and splashed on the back of his armor. He lowered his body and quickly stopped. He turned around and stabbed the cytoplasmic worm's body. Then he shook his arm and widened the wound. He quickly pulled out his sword and kicked the cytoplasmic worm. The cytoplasmic worm lost balance and leaned forward. At the same time, he quickly caught up and cut the sarcomas on its body. Before coming to the barren area, he had done a lot of homework. He memorized the monster atlas. He knew that the cytoplasmic worm's fatal weakness was these sarcomas. They could give birth to small cytoplasmic worms. This was a monster that reproduced monogamously. The battle ended quickly. Eugene was a junior Lemmeter after all. He could fight a monster that was level 40. Although this named monster was stronger than ordinary monsters of the same level, its overall combat ability was only around level 30. A difference of 10 levels meant a crushing defeat. After killing the cytoplasmic worm, Eugene took out a parasitic soul worm from its blood and put it in a bottle in his backpack. Everyone would wear this special bottle to store parasitic soul worms before coming out. This was in case they were lucky enough to have something to store them in the future. Returning to the crowd, Eugene smiled. This little thing is quite agile. Ian smiled. Let's go. The smell of blood here is too heavy. We don't want to attract other monsters. Then he quickly led the team along the street. A long time after everyone left the street, the body of the cytoplasmic one lying in the middle of the street trembled slightly. Then, it seemed to be dragged by something into the darkness of the alley next to it. And then there was the sound of bones being chewed. After killing the cytoplasmic worm, Dean and the others met a lot of monsters. Most of them were undead. Occasionally, they met flying monsters. These flying monsters hovered in the sky. Occasionally, they would swoop down and pick up undead or unknown monsters from the ground. Then they would fly into the sky and disappear into the distance. The sky was getting dark. Ian stopped and led Dean and the others to a basement in the ruins. The area was covered with dust and cobwebs. There was also some dry and viscous slurry. It seemed to be the saliva and feces left by some monsters. Obviously, there used to be monsters living here. But from the traces of the dry mucus, it seemed that the monsters that lived here had left a long time ago. Deal with the blood on your body. Ian used a grass brush that was rolled up by the roadside vines to wipe the blood on his armor. Eugene, Rosemary, Martin, and others silently wiped the bloodstains on their armors. They knew that the danger outside the giant wall would gradually come. The longer they stayed in the giant wall, the more bloodstains they would get. The higher the chance of attracting high-level monsters. Chapter 522. The night was quiet. Ian arranged Ruby and Dean to be on duty so that the others could have a good rest and restore their physical strength in order to be in the best condition for tomorrow's battle. Give me the signal immediately if you sense any monster approaching. Ruby said to Dean. Dean nodded slightly. Both of them sat at opposite ends of the basement. They were always paying attention to the movements outside. There was no bonfire in the dark basement, as they didn't want the heat to attract the monsters. Eugene, Ian, and others were tightly wrapped in clothes. They were leaning against the wall and sleeping. They were holding weapons in their hands. It seemed that they would wake up at any time and enter the battle. Dean maintained the thermal vision state. He was paying attention to the movements of the monsters outside. He was also paying attention to the physical state of Ian and others. He could see the blood flow in their bodies and the contraction of their hearts. I have to find a way to leave the team and find Sergei after the mission is completed. Dean's eyes lit up as he secretly thought about the method. The night was long. From time to time, low roars of beasts and roars of monsters echoed from the street above the basement. Every time there was a sound, Dean and Ruby's heart would tighten, and their whole body would tense up. They would relax a little after the sound disappeared. The night passed in the blink of an eye. Dawn shined from the direction of the vents into the basement. Ruby saw that the sky was bright, so he woke up Ian and others. They had breakfast and packed up their things. Luna and Dean checked the movements outside to confirm that there were no monsters nearby. They quietly climbed out of the basement and went to the street outside. Let's go. Ian led the way. Everyone pulled out their weapons and followed behind him. He quietly walked along the street. Along the way, he saw some monster skeletons on the ground. In addition, he also encountered a pool of fresh blood. Dean recalled the roars of monsters he heard last night. He guessed that most of the blood was left from the battle at that time. On the quiet and desolate street, a few corpses were staggering. When they heard the footsteps of the crowd, they immediately turned their heads and looked over. Their numb faces were full of blood, and suddenly they showed a hideous expression. They roared and rushed over. Xiao Du, you're in charge of cleaning up. Eugene needs to conserve his strength for the battle against the silencers, Ian said. Dean nodded and pulled a white bone from the wreckage of a monster on the ground. He rushed out of the team and killed several undeads. The bone spear easily penetrated their skulls. The disparity in physical strength allowed Dean to quickly end the battle without causing much movement. After killing several undeads, Dean held the bone spear and continued to move forward. He didn't want to waste arrows in the face of monsters whose level was no more than 10. Although the arrows could be recovered, the sharpness would be worn out. Along the way, they encountered some undeads along the way, as well as monsters that were the size of wolves but had the head of mice. They were all killed by Dean. It's strange that these weak zombies are still alive in a place with so many high-level monsters, Eugene muttered as he walked. No one answered him. Ian and the others were vigilant. Although they had Luna and Dean, they didn't dare to take the situation lightly. Dean's heart was moved as he heard Eugene's words. He thought about the undead's powder sold by the hunters in the giant wall. It could suppress the smell of the body and avoid the monster's attacks. It seemed that only a small part of the monsters would attack the undeads. The rest of the monsters were indifferent to the undeads. Was it because of the small number of scavenging monsters? In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the foothills at the edge of the city. There were many uneven pits on the road leading to the mountain. It seemed that they were pierced by blunt weapons. They looked like footprints, but didn't have claws like footprints. Ian glanced at them and said, "Prepare to enter the mountain." The wind listeners have very sensitive senses and can hear even the slightest movement. Everyone, put on your shoes and control your breathing. Breathe according to the demon-devouring rat breathing technique of 3 shallow breaths and 1 deep breaths. He took out the cloth that he had prepared from his backpack. He bent down and wrapped the alloy boots on his feet. It was a great extent of noise reduction. As for the 3 shallow and 1 deep breathing method, it was a very common method of camouflage. It was specifically used to prevent the monsters with sensitive hearing. Dean and others also finished their preparations after Ian was done. They adjusted their breathing and quietly went into the mountains. A few hundred meters into the mountain, Dean saw a large number of red heat sources lurking in the deep grass of the mountain. But these heat sources weren't big, just some small monsters between level 3 to 18. They didn't pose a threat to the team. Nevertheless, Dean gestured to signal them. Ian nodded and continued to move forward. The wet fog of the morning shrouded the mountain. Dean and the others entered the mountain. The fog blocked the road in front of the foothills and hid their figures. They moved forward quietly. Suddenly, Luna's face changed. She raised her hand and made a signal. Roar. At the same time as she gave the signal, a giant black shadow suddenly jumped out from the grass, shrouded in a thin layer of mist, roaring and pouncing towards them. Everyone was shocked. Ian and Martin were the fastest to react. Eugene was scared by the black shadow. His face turned pale as he instinctively retreated. He shrank into the team to get a sense of security. With a clanging sound, sparks flew out from the friction. Ian's sharp sword slashed the giant black shadow's body and blocked its pouncing momentum. However, he also swayed a little and staggered 2 steps back, almost falling down. Martin immediately stood in front of him. His weapons were 2 black knives. He crossed them in front of him and stared at the black shadow. He didn't rush forward, but waited for the team to adjust. Rosemary and Ruby quickly stood in position. Ruby threw the huge baggage on her to the side, pulled out her battle axe, and stood on guard. She looked nervous. Dean was able to see the appearance of the black shadow. Its upper body was humanoid. It had a muscular chest, but its head was like an eagle's. It didn't have eyes. Its lower body was like a snake's tail. It had 2 strong arms. There were several sharp flat spurs on the outside of its arms. Chapter 5:23. Everyone's face changed as they heard Ian's words. They nervously glanced around as their hearts beat faster. Before coming here, everyone had looked through the information. According to the records in the Magical Creature Atlas, the wind silencers were a type of regional magical creature. They liked to use their nests as their territory. There were some magical creatures following them, and there were also guardians with similar living habits. The corpse pecker in front of them was one of the guardians of the wind silencers. Pecker was also a monster that was given a name. Moreover, it was a rare monster like the silencer. Pecker and the silencer were at the same stage. The pecker was willing to be the guardian of the silencer mainly because of its living habits. The silencer would secrete a corrosive acid when it ate. It would make the prey rot quickly before eating. The corpse pecker was also a magical creature that loved to eat rotten meat. It was the so-called birds of a feather flock together. In addition to similar appetites, the silencer had a keen sense of hearing, and the pecker had a strong hunting ability. They were almost one of the best partners among the monsters. Martin licked his lips and whispered, "Ian, watch the surroundings. Don't let the silencers launch a sneak attack. Rosemary, Eugene, both of you cooperate with me to kill it. Newbie Dean, you support us with arrows. Also look around." Eugene's body trembled as he heard his name. Rosemary didn't hesitate to say yes. She stepped out of the team and stood next to Martin. She held her sword and was ready to support Martin. Ian took out his bow and aimed at the pecker. He was ready to support it at any time. Roar! After the pecker was repelled by Ian, the sharp bone spur on the side of its arm was chipped. With an angry roar, the pecker swung its thick tail and pounced on Martin and Mary as fast as the wind. Martin roared as his arms became a lot thicker. His skin turned red as he stamped his feet to meet the pecker. The ability of his magic marks was to increase his strength and heal himself. So even though he had just become a high-level frontiersman, in terms of pure strength, he was comparable to the limit of a high-level frontiersman. Moreover, his self-healing ability was extremely strong, which made his fighting style inclined to the side of not caring about his life. Martin's sword fiercely collided with the pecker's arm. The edge of the sword was caught by the bone spur on the pecker's arm. The corpse pecker growled and raised his other arm to smash the corpse pecker's head. Rosemary, who was coordinating from the side, immediately leaped up and stabbed at its armpit with a one-handed sword. She wanted to chop off its arm. The corpse pecker had to turn its arm down to parry the rapier, while its other hand swung to shake off Martin, who was trying to entangle it. Dean aimed the arrow at the corpse pecker's head. He wanted to find a weakness, but the corpse pecker's head was like an eagle's beak. It had a smooth black shell and no eyes or nose. The mouth was hidden under the black shell. It was almost impossible to shoot the arrow directly into its mouth unless he stood under its body and shot. He did not fire his arrow, but waited. According to the Monster Atlas, the size and height of the corpse pecker should only be in the mature stage, and its hunting level should be between 46 and 52. Eugene, what are you still standing there for? Ian, who was on high alert, couldn't help but roar when he saw Eugene standing there motionless. Eugene replied in a timid tone, "I don't dare to go." Ian's lungs almost exploded as he heard Eugene's words. "Bastard! What are you talking about? Do you think we can live if something happens to them? Hurry up." If it weren't for the fact that he had to be wary of the wind listeners who might be lying in ambush in the surroundings, he would have already charged forward with his saber. Eugene bitterly said, "The corpse pecker is around level 50. Even a senior limitless expert may not be able to deal with it. I'm just a junior limitless expert. Wouldn't it be suicide if I go up? Moreover, it will hinder Martin. It's better to stay here." Ian's hands trembled in anger as he saw Eugene's face. Eugene's performance was good, and he was very obedient. Ian didn't expect that Eugene would throw a tantrum in the face of a crisis. He gritted his teeth and glared at him fiercely, then said to Ruby beside him, "You go help." Ruby also angrily stared at Eugene. He held his axe and rushed forward. Dean was standing at the back of the team. He frowned as he heard Eugene and Ian's words. He looked at Eugene and raised his eyebrows. Eugene's heartbeat was smooth. It showed that he was very calm. He wasn't as flustered and scared as he showed on the surface. It meant that he did it on purpose. Dean narrowed his eyes as he thought of a possibility. Eugene seemed to be aware of Dean's thoughts. He looked back at Dean with a faint smile on his lips. However, there was a trace of coldness in his eyes. Bang! Ruby, who had just rushed forward, was hit in the chest by the corpse pecker's tail. He flew back and was caught by Luna. Ruby's face flushed red. He roared, raised his battle axe, and rushed forward again. Dean knew that Ruby's magic mark ability wasn't a combat-type ability. It was a survival-type ability. He could absorb leaves and other non-toxic plants as food to maintain his vitality. Moreover, he could store enough nutrients in his body in advance. He could consume a part of it every day. It was similar to how cold-blooded snakes went into hibernation. He could store food in advance for months in advance. If it was a competition of endurance and energy consumption, he was the undisputed king of the team. But he was slightly weaker in a head-on fight. The corpse pecker's lower body twisted while its upper body swayed from side to side. It was hard to predict its movements. It waved its arms and rushed towards Martin. Through its body's sensitivity to heat, it realized that the one in front of it was the most threatening among the group of prey. Martin clenched his teeth as he waved his sword to block the bone spikes on the corpse pecker's arm. If it was an ordinary steel sword, it would have broken by now. Whoosh! Suddenly, Rosemary, who was next to her, twisted her body and rushed over in an extremely strange posture. The rapier in her hand stabbed silently into one of the corpse pecker's arms. The corpse pecker did not have any scales on its upper body. Instead, it had grayish-white skin similar to a human's. Rosemary's rapier pierced through the corpse pecker's body, and as she pulled out the arrow, blood spurted out. Ian's eyes lit up as he saw Rosemary hit the corpse pecker. Martin, pin it down and wait for the green poison to attack. Chapter 524. Whoosh! The pecker screamed and quickly twisted its body. Its strong upper body was like a terrifying shadow as it approached Martin. Its thick arms were waving fast like a shadow. Martin's pupil shrank as he waved his sword to parry. Suddenly, he felt a pain in his chest. He quickly retreated. His muscles tightened. He felt a chill as if the god of death had gently stroked his head. Ian saw that Martin couldn't contain the angry pecker, so he quickly said, "Rosemary, use the rope to tie it up." Rosemary didn't wait for his order. She had already taken out an iron-black chain out of nowhere. Her body suddenly rushed forward, and her hands and feet approached in a very strange posture. She threw the chain over the corpse pecker's head and shouted to Ruby on the other side, "Catch it!" Seeing the opportunity, Ruby clenched his teeth and rushed out, grabbing the rope that was wrapped around the corpse pecker's neck. He stomped his feet on the ground and pulled the chain with all his might. The veins on his arms bulged. Dean saw the opportunity. He didn't wait for Ian to open his mouth. His wrist shook and the arrow broke through the air. Whoosh! The arrow whistled through the air. By the time it whistled through the air, the arrow had already struck the corpse pecker's head like a black shadow. Bang! The arrowhead exploded. The lead that was poured into the arrowhead splashed and slowly fell down the pecker's smooth head. It didn't penetrate the black carapace of the pecker's head. Dean frowned. The hardness of the pecker's carapace was beyond his expectation. The first arrow was ineffective, so Dean put another arrow. The pecker didn't wait for the second shot. It roared and twisted its body. Its arms were several times thicker than a human's. It grabbed the chain around its neck and pulled it. Rosemary and Ruby, at both ends of the chain, lost their balance. They almost stumbled and fell down. Martin saw the opportunity and rushed forward with his sword. Roar! The corpse pecker roared and swung the chain in its hand, smashing it down on Martin's head. Martin's face slightly changed. He raised his sword to block the attack. Bang! The pecker's fist hit the sword. The sword was slightly dented and seemed to break. Martin's feet sank into the ground. His knees were slightly bent. He almost knelt down. Ian and the others who witnessed this scene from behind were shocked. They didn't expect the corpse pecker to be so powerful. It was beyond their expectations. Ian slightly clenched his teeth, feeling both nervous and a little fearful. He looked around at the thick bushes around him, but unfortunately his vision was blocked. He couldn't look down from the sky, so he couldn't confirm where the wind listeners were hiding. If the wind listeners also made a move at this moment, then the situation would be extremely terrible. When he hesitated and was about to announce a retreat, Ruby, who had fallen a few meters away from the corpse pecker, suddenly roared. There seemed to be a faint purplish-black color on his dark skin, and the blood vessels all over his body bulged, including his face. It looked like countless purplish-black earthworms and poisonous snakes were crawling all over his body. It was extremely terrifying. Ian's face changed as he saw the changes. Dante dashed before he could finish his words. Ruby roared and suddenly stood up. He raised his giant axe and slashed at the corpse pecker fiercely. Dean, who was standing behind Ruby, was ready to shoot the second arrow to pin down the pecker. He felt that his sight was occupied by a ball of flame. At this moment, Ruby's body was exuding a terrible heat. Even Martin and Ian, who were the strongest in the team, couldn't compare to half of the heat he was exuding. The corpse pecker seemed to have sensed the danger as well. It turned its head to look and immediately faced Ruby's giant axe. Whoosh! The pecker waved its arm to attack. With a puff, dark red blood spurted out, and the corpse pecker instantly lost its balance. It seemed to be stunned for a moment, and when it looked down, its arm was gone. With a thud, an arm fell from the sky like a parabola and rolled on the withered weeds on the ground. Martin and Rosemary saw the opportunity. They didn't stay in a daze. Instead, they roared and rushed forward. Corpse Pecker reacted quickly and twisted its body to dodge Martin's sword. However, it was unable to dodge Rosemary's sword attack. Rosemary's sword left a shallow cut on its back. Although the cut was light and the damage was minimal, the wound quickly corroded like boiling water. Whoosh! Dean aimed at the opportunity and shot the second arrow. The arrow whistled as it reached the extreme speed of the bow. With a thud, the arrow flew toward the corpse pecker's broken arm, which it was trying to dodge. It hit its target at an extremely tricky angle and pierced through its broken arm. The pecker screamed in pain. It angrily waved its remaining arm to repel Martin. At the same time, it twisted its body and drilled into the deep grass to escape. Want to leave? A cold light flashed in Rosemary's eyes, and she quickly swung the chain. Her body was light and agile, and the chain danced like a living creature as it swept past the corpse pecker's neck. At the same time, it wrapped around the corpse pecker's broken arm. On the other side, Ruby saw an opportunity. He roared and pounced forward. His sturdy arms tightly grasped the chain. He stomped his feet on the ground and pulled the chain back fiercely. The corpse pecker was suddenly pulled backward. Puff! Martin, who had rushed from behind, stabbed the corpse pecker with his saber. The saber pierced through the corpse pecker's back. The tip of the saber was exposed on the corpse pecker's chest, and blood immediately oozed out. Martin kicked the pecker's back and quickly pulled out his sword to prevent the pecker from counterattacking. Blood slowly flowed from the black carapace on the corpse pecker's head. Its body writhed, trying to break free from the chains, but its strength was exhausted. Soon it slowly fell to the ground, twitching slightly, its snake tail swinging unconsciously. Seeing that they had finally killed it, Martin and the others heaved a sigh of relief and gasped for breath in exhaustion. Ian looked around vigilantly. Don't relax. Pay attention to the surroundings. Upon hearing his words, Martin and the rest, who had relaxed earlier, suddenly felt their hearts tighten. They immediately gripped their weapons tightly. The three of them stood back to back and returned to the group. They nervously looked at the thick bushes around them, guarding against the wind listeners who might rush out at any time. The grass rustled in the breeze. It seemed that there were countless monsters hiding in it. No one dared to breathe loudly. After a while, the corpse pecker on the ground was completely dead. Its blood flowed all over the ground, and its tail gradually stopped twitching. Luna whispered, "Captain, the silencer isn't here. There are no monsters around." Ian said, "I didn't see any shadow of a monster." Ian nodded. "Deal with the corpse and collect the parasitic soul worms. Get ready to go to the silencer's cave." "Yes." Rosemary pulled out the dagger and went forward to collect the parasitic soul worms from the pecker's body. Martin helped Ruby. "Are you okay?" Ruby's face was pale. He forced a smile. "I'm fine." Dean noticed that his hands were trembling. He frowned. "What did you just do?" Ian said in a low voice. Although Ruby's ability is survival type, he can quickly digest and absorb the stored food in his body during a battle and turn it into a powerful short-term burst of power. However, this is a huge burden on his body, so he can't use it too much. Ian looked at Eugene, who was next to him. At this time, Ian, Luna, and others' eyes fell on Eugene. Eugene bitterly said, "Captain, I didn't mean it." Ian looked at him coldly and said, "Do you want to kill all of us?" Eugene quickly replied, "How could I? I wouldn't be able to live if something happened to you. It's good that you know this." Martin continued. His gaze was sharp as he stared into Eugene's eyes. "If this happens again, even if I don't kill the monster, I will be the first to retreat and kill you." Eugene smiled. "I won't dare to do it again." Ian gave him a deep look. He wasn't interested in talking anymore. Seeing Rosemary put away Corpse Pecker's parasitic soulworm, he immediately said, "Prepare to go. The Wind Listener's cave should be nearby." He patted Ian's shoulder. "You did a good job. The arrows were very accurate." Chapter 5:25. "Martin, is your wound okay?" Luna walked towards Martin and asked in a worried tone. Martin shook his head. "It's been treated and there's no infection. Don't worry." "That's good." Luna looked at Martin's wound and sighed in relief. Ian waited for everyone to adjust themselves and said, "Let's go." He took the lead and led the way. Martin, Rosemary, and others followed behind him. Dean looked at Eugene. There was a trace of coldness in his eyes. He was ready to find an opportunity to get rid of Eugene and interrogate him about the mastermind behind the scenes. The mountain was foggy and the air was humid. There was a faint rotten smell and fishy smell. Ian took the lead and walked towards the direction of the fog. His magic marks could control body temperature and sense the temperature difference in the surrounding air. It could be described as a precise body thermometer. Of course, this was only one of his abilities. It was suitable for camouflage. "It's a bit strange," Martin suddenly said after climbing for more than 200 meters. Ian looked back at him. "What's wrong?" Martin looked at the deep grass and leaves around him and said in a low voice, "Didn't you notice that the density of the fog is a bit too high? It's still the black snow season. The temperature is so low, and there's no sun today. There shouldn't be such a thick fog. There's too much dew on it." Everyone was startled as they heard Martin's words. They noticed that the grass was covered with dew as if it had been washed by heavy rain. However, there was no sign of rain when they came here yesterday. Moreover, the road wasn't wet either. Ian furrowed his brows and remained silent. His many years of hunting experience told him that there must be a reason behind this anomaly. However, the target of the mission was nearby, and they couldn't retreat just because of this. After all, they had already killed the corpse-pecking guards around the Wind Listeners. If they turned back now and the Wind Listeners sensed danger and left this place, it would be even more difficult to find them again. The time and distance they would have to spend would be a form of risk. He thought for a moment and whispered, "Everyone be careful. Be ready to evacuate if there's an abnormal situation." Everyone nodded and became even more vigilant. Dean followed the team and did not dare to relax. After all, this was a wasteland. Pioneers would encounter danger. Although he had life-saving wings, it was difficult to guarantee that he would not be killed by the powerful monsters before he could react. "I smell it." After walking for hundreds of meters, Luna suddenly said. She gently sniffed the tip of her nose as she raised her finger and pointed to a high slope in front of them. "The smell of the Wind Listeners is in front." Ian looked back at her. "Are you sure?" "Yes." Luna nodded seriously. The monster Atlas recorded the smell of the Wind Listener. "It's very similar to what I'm smelling now. It should be the Wind Listener." Ian nodded and felt a little relieved. He didn't expect his luck to be so good this time. He found the target as soon as he arrived in the barren area. However, what followed was a dangerous and bitter battle. His expression became a bit more dignified, and he said to everyone, "Get ready to fight. Ruby, put the food here first, in case it's inconvenient to move later." Ruby nodded and put down the huge bag on his back. He stuffed it into the gap between two nearby trees. "Let's go." Ian took the lead and walked forward. Everyone quickly followed him. Soon they walked out of the woods and saw a piece of flat land in front of them. In front of the flat land was a huge rock, steep and indented. At the intersection of the depression, there was a dark cave. Even Dean, who had an ordinary sense of smell, could smell the stench from the cave. It was mixed with the rotten smell of the damp soil in the swamp and another kind of indescribable, strange smell, which was creepy and nauseating. Ian looked at the cave and said in a low voice, "It's here. Prepare the torches." Ruby took out several torches from his backpack. He poured kerosene on them and lit them up. He handed one torch to Ian and Martin. He handed one torch to Eugene. As for Dean, Rosemary, and Luna, they were informed that they had night vision, so they didn't need torches. Ian also had night vision. He picked up the torch and threw it into the cave. Whoosh! The firelight rolled in the air like a wheel, falling straight into the cave. The firelight was imprinted on the edge of the cave, and an extremely disgusting scene could be seen. The walls of the cave were not made of thick rock and soil, but a black cutic-like substance that crawled all over the cave. It looked a little like dried feces, a little like molted hard shells, and more like the rotten flesh of some animals. A strong stench was emitted from the black substance on the cave wall. After the fire flew into the cave, it quickly disappeared. However, everyone looked at the cave warily, as if they were facing a great enemy. They got into formation and prepared for battle. Time passed little by little. 10 minutes passed, but there was still no movement in the cave. Ian frowned. Was it because the depth of the cave was too long that it didn't alarm the silencer? He glanced at the surrounding ground, picked up a stone, and moved a little closer. Then he threw it inside again. With a bang, the stone hit the rock wall and made a muffled sound. Ian took 2 steps back and returned to the team. He stared at the cave vigilantly. They waited for another 4 or 5 minutes, but there was still no response from the cave. Ian was puzzled as he saw such a strange situation. Martin, Rosemary, Luna, and others looked at each other. It would be much more dangerous if they entered the cave. After all, it was the nest of the silencer. The silencer would be more familiar with the place. Moreover, the environment inside the cave was narrow. It wasn't conducive for them to fight as a team. The open space outside the cave was perfect for them to exert all their strength. However, even with such a huge commotion, the wind listeners didn't react at all, unless it wasn't in the nest. Everyone thought of this possibility at the same time. Ian's eyes flashed, and he whispered, "It might not be in the cave. Prepare to go in with me and set up an ambush. Be careful, in case it hides in the dark of the cave and ambushes us." Although the possibility of the latter was small, and with the intelligence of the wind listeners, it was still a possibility. Naturally, they had to be on guard. Everyone nodded and slowly followed him to the cave. Luna tightly covered her nose as they got closer. Her keen sense of smell made her face turn green. She had a feeling of suffocation. Ian looked around, but didn't see any heat reaction. However, the silencer was a cold-blooded monster. It was natural that its thermal vision couldn't detect anything. Suddenly, he saw 2 silver scales on the side of a protruding stone 4 or 5 meters away from the entrance of the cave. The scales were stained with a sticky, silk-like liquid. It exuded a fishy smell. Chapter 5:26. Dean's eyes flashed as he thought of corpse pecker. He whispered, "Be careful. There may be intelligent monsters hiding in the cave." Ian and others were shocked when they heard Dean's words. Ruby, who was standing nearby, asked, "Did you see it?" Dean shook his head and pointed to the silver scale. "This isn't the scale of the silencer. There may be other monsters here. Our previous lure didn't alarm it. It means that this thing has evolved to have a high level of intelligence." Ian looked in the direction he was pointing and saw the scales on the ground. He frowned and said in a low voice, "Not bad. Everyone be careful." Eugene laughed and said, "You're overreacting. It's just a piece of scale. It could have been left behind by a monster that the wind listeners hunted. How much intelligence can a monster evolve to? Our bait would have alerted it a long time ago." Martin ignored him and looked at Ian. "Dean's words are reasonable. Be careful." Ian nodded and lowered his body. He held a sword in one hand and a dagger in the other. He slowly moved forward. Eugene's eyebrows twitched as he saw that no one paid attention to him. He knew that he had lost the trust of the people. He chuckled but didn't care. He leisurely followed Ian and others into the cave. There was a faint breeze as they went deeper into the cave. It was accompanied by a strong smell of rotten corpses and excrement. Dean and others frowned. Luna's face was ugly. She didn't dare to breathe. Her previous superior sense of smell had become her fatal weakness at this moment. The walls of the cave were covered with sticky and smelly liquid. There were also damp excrement and other things. It was extremely filthy. After going 100 meters in, they suddenly saw the bones of some monsters scattered on the ground. There was still fur and flesh that hadn't been completely gnawed on. Ian squatted down and examined them. After seeing the bite marks, his expression turned serious, and he said, "This is indeed the lair of the silencers. Be careful." Everyone nodded slightly in agreement. Ian continued to lead the way. The curvature of the cave was like a dark and thick, oily intestine. Everyone held their breath as they were nervous. They knew that it would be difficult to fight in the nest of the silencer. Moreover, they didn't know if there were other monsters besides the silencer. Dean wanted them to light torches and smoke the entrance of the cave to force the monsters out. But considering the existence of Eugene and other factors, he resisted the proposal. In the blink of an eye, they went 400 or 500 meters into the cave. There weren't any jagged rock spikes on the ground. The walls were smooth, and there were monsters of different sizes everywhere. When they were more than 400 meters deep, they also saw a few zombies whose bodies had been torn apart. Only the head and the ribs were left. They crawled slowly on the ground, making low noises like insects. It was a little scary in this quiet cave. Ian was scared as he saw the undeads. He angrily killed them and continued to move forward. "Hey!" Ian's pupils shrank as he saw something. He raised his hand to signal Luna, Dean, and others to stop. Their palms were overflowing with cold sweat as they stared at the front. Ian took 2 steps forward and focused his gaze. He immediately saw the face of the terrifying shadow blocking the passage. After looking carefully, he almost cried out in alarm and whispered, "It's the blood cinder." Martin's heart skipped a beat, and he had an awful look on his face. The blood cinder was a rare magical beast, just like the wind listener and the corpse pecker. If he were to encounter the wind listener and the blood cinder at the same time here, it would be an unpredictable and bitter battle. Before he could finish worrying, he heard what Ian said next. "He's dead." "Dead?" Martin was startled. Luna, Ruby, and others were also startled. Dean's night vision was sensitive. He had already seen the huge wound on the chest of the shadow. The blood had already dried up. It was like it was burned by a blazing flame. The blood and bones had turned into magma and solidified in the wound. Ian swallowed a mouthful of saliva and slowly approached. He stabbed out his saber and penetrated the blood cinder's body that looked like a ferocious starfish. The latter's body shook slightly as if it had come back to life. Ian immediately sheathed his knife. With a bang, the blood cinder's body fell straight to the ground. Ian was pale. He gently gasped for breath. He tentatively used the tip of his sword to poke the blood cinder's body. Soon he found that the blood cinder was dead. Its body was stiff. It had been dead for a long time. His face changed. Was it an internal strife among the monsters? He hesitated for a moment, but gritted his teeth. "Ruby, find out if the parasitic soul worm is still in its body." Ruby swallowed her saliva. She took out the bottle and went forward. Ian, on the other hand, was observing his surroundings in case there was danger lurking in the dark. After a while, Ruby excitedly shouted, "The parasitic soul worm is still there." Raising the bottle, there was a centipede-like bug imprisoned in the bottle, struggling with all its might, as if it wanted to break the transparent wall. Ian was startled for a moment. He didn't expect that the parasitic soul worm in the blood donor who had died a long time ago would still be alive. It had to be known that after the death of its host, the parasitic soul worm would die if it couldn't find a new host in a short period of time. This usually took between half an hour to 3 hours, but from the rigidity of the blood donor's body, it was clear that the parasitic soul worm was more than 3 hours old. Soon he thought of the special body structure of the blood cinder. It seemed that the parasitic soul worm was one of the few monsters that could survive in the host's body for a long time after the death of the host. He whispered, "Follow me. It's a bit unusual here." Ruby excitedly put away the parasitic soul worm. He held the axe and followed Ian. After walking for hundreds of meters, a corner appeared in front of them. A very slight sound came from the other side of the corner. It seemed to be the sound of sand rubbing on the ground. Ian's eyes narrowed. He made a warning gesture and held his weapon. He lowered his body and slowly sneaked over. Whoosh! As soon as he got close to the corner, he suddenly rushed out, ready to launch a surprise attack. However, the moment he jumped out of the corner, his hand holding the weapon stopped. He stared at the scene in front of him with his eyes wide open. On the ground in the corner, a monster lay dying. Its lower body resembled that of a spider, but it had a huge flesh sac and many sharp, multi-jointed legs. Its upper body resembled that of a hound, with a ferocious canine head and huge ears that did not droop on both sides of its head. Instead, they spread out like hardened scallops. Rather than calling them ears, they looked more like armor that protected its head. The Wind Listener? Ian was stunned. Martin, Ruby, and the others who quickly followed behind also saw the scene and were stunned at the corner. This strange monster was the Wind Listener. At the moment, it was lying on the ground weakly. Its lower body was like a spider's meat sack. Its intestines and other things were dragged on the ground for more than 10 meters. Several multi-jointed legs were broken. What was more terrible was that the chin of the dog's head was missing. Only a row of teeth in the upper jaw and the tongue in the throat were hanging weakly on the neck. Dean also saw the dying Wind Listener with many fatal wounds. He was startled for a moment. Suddenly, he felt a chill from the surrounding cave. He couldn't help but look back at the exit of the cave. His face changed slightly. Ian had already recovered from his shock. He immediately rushed forward and swung his saber at the Wind Listener's broken jaw. He instantly chopped off the Wind Listener's drooping tongue along with his head. Blood spurted out. Ian stepped back to avoid the blood rain. He looked at the Wind Listener who had completely fallen. He was relieved and turned to Ruby. "Come and collect the parasitic soul worm." "Okay." Ruby's eyes lit up. He immediately rushed up. Ian shook off the bloodstains on his saber and exhaled softly. Chapter 5:27. We've carried out so many missions, but this is the first time we've encountered such a thing. Huh? Ruby laughed. It's not that simple. Martin squatted beside the silencer's body and carefully looked at it. He frowned and whispered. This silencer's wound was fatal. It's the weakest part of its body. It doesn't look like it was caused by the blood sender. Ian looked at Martin. What do you mean? Martin used the dagger to pick up the wound on the silencer's flesh sac and jaw and said, "Look, these two wounds aren't caused by the blood sender's tentacles. Aside from these two wounds, the rest of the body is perfectly fine." Ian focused his gaze, and he was instantly moved. "You're saying?" "Yes." Martin slowly got up. His eyes were gloomy as he slowly swept over everyone's face. If my guess is correct, it should have been killed by another monster. Moreover, it should have been killed by an overwhelming force. It didn't even have the strength to fight back. Luna and Ruby suddenly froze. Rosemary's eyes slightly widened. "You mean there are other monsters in this nest?" Martin looked at her and shook his head. "I'm not sure if that thing is still here. But this silencer should have been killed by a higher-level monster." Luna gulped. "A higher-level monster?" "A monster that can overwhelm and kill the silencer without being detected." "Is it a higher-level monster from the Red Wasteland?" Martin's face was gloomy. He didn't answer her, but looked at Ian. Ian didn't hesitate as he decisively said, "Take out the parasitic soul worm and leave this place." Ruby didn't dare to delay. He quickly found the parasitic soul worm in the silencer's body. It looked like a small spider. Its whole body was stained with the silencer's blood. It was constantly struggling when it was put into the bottle. Ruby had just twisted the bottle cap when suddenly a loud bang came from outside the cave. The ground slightly trembled. Everyone's complexion changed. Ian suddenly looked at the direction of the cave exit. His face was pale and ugly. Boom! There was another loud sound. It seemed to be the footsteps of some giant creature, and it was approaching the nest. Dean felt the tremor under his feet. His face was gloomy. From this violent movement, he could imagine how huge this thing was, although the size could not absolutely determine the strength of a monster. But in most cases, the large size of the monster was often of a high level. Is that thing back? Ruby's dark face was also a little pale. The strong shaking caused by the footsteps had already instinctively formed a huge and terrifying outline in his mind. Ian came back to his senses, hesitated for a moment, and immediately said, "Run inside, hide in the innermost part." If this was the demonic creature that had killed the Wind Listeners, then there was no doubt that their team would have no chance of winning against it. After all, even if they encountered the Wind Listeners, they would have to put up a bitter fight. However, the Wind Listeners had been easily killed by the demonic creature. This kind of power could easily annihilate their team. They could only hide. Moreover, their task had been completed. They had obtained the parasitic soul worm of the Wind Listeners. Now they only needed to think about how to survive and return to the giant wall. Martin, Luna, Rosemary, and others didn't doubt Ian's order. They immediately followed behind Ian and crossed the corpse of the Wind Listeners. They rushed into the cave. Eugene glanced at Dean and also followed. He didn't dare to fall behind. Dean looked back at the direction of the cave exit. It was estimated that the rock wall was too thick, so his thermal vision couldn't see the heat of the thing outside the cave. After all, the penetration of vision was limited. Dean's face was gloomy. He didn't expect to encounter such a thing in his first mission. Accidents could happen at any time in the wasteland. He followed Ian and others into the cave. Although his instinct told him that this was not a good idea, but he couldn't think of any better idea. Soon, everyone moved forward. As they went deeper into the cave, they saw more and more monster skeletons on the ground. Rotten pulp and feces could be seen everywhere. Apparently, the monster didn't have the concept of cleaning. Boom, boom. The roar outside the nest was getting farther away, but it was still clear. After running for several hundred meters, Ian, who was at the very front, suddenly stopped. Everyone looked up and saw that there was no way out. In front of them was a dead end. Obviously, this was the deepest part of the nest. Damn it! Ian punched the rock wall. His face was full of anger. Boom, boom. The trembling sound slowly approached from outside the nest. The surrounding rock wall slightly trembled. Sand fell down. It seemed that the thing was squeezing into the cave. Could it be that it noticed us? Ruby said in a trembling voice. If this was the deepest part of the cave, and they didn't see any other living creature along the way, then it was obvious that it was aware of them. Otherwise, there was no reason for it to continue to follow them. Ian, Martin, and others' faces turned ugly. If they were targeted by such a thing, then it would be very difficult to escape. Moreover, they would have to pay an extremely heavy price. Everyone's mood was incomparably heavy. The atmosphere was so heavy that they couldn't breathe. Dean also knew that he had encountered a life-threatening crisis. His heart was pounding, and the blood in his body was flowing fast as if it was about to burn. There was an instinctive sense of restlessness, but he quickly suppressed this anxious feeling and calmed down. His eyes swept around, and his pupils shrank into a small dot, making the white of his eyes too big, looking a bit strange and scary. Dean suddenly saw a weak source of heat in the ground under his feet. He suddenly thought of a possibility and immediately said, "There should be a nest under our feet. Let's dig down immediately." What? Ian and others were surprised. Dean said in a hurry, "Dig the passage if you don't want to die. It should be the second nest of the silencers." Ian recovered as he saw Dean's urgent look. Although he didn't have time to think about the reason, but there was no other way. "Listen to little Dean. Hurry up." Everyone immediately took out the pickaxes from their backpacks. The pickaxes were made of metal and didn't have wooden handles. Therefore, they were able to exert their strength to a great extent. Dean explained to everyone, "There is no sign of the silencers living nearby. There must be some other purpose for it to dig so deep. My thermal vision has detected a weak source of heat. If I'm not wrong, then it's likely to be an egg. Is there a heat source below? Ian and others' eyes lit up as they heard Dudian's words. They worked harder to dig the soil. Bang! In less than half a minute, everyone worked together to dig a huge pit. As Ruby used all his strength to hoe, the soil under his feet suddenly collapsed, and everyone fell into it. They fell 7 or 8 meters to the ground. They didn't care about the pain as they quickly turned over and climbed up. They vigilantly looked around. However, when his palm hit the ground, it felt extremely sticky. It was like countless mucus, but the viscosity of this mucus was far higher than mucus. It was even stickier than glue. Dean got up and quickly looked around. He saw countless white eggs in the dark and empty nest. There were several towering pillars in the nest. There were a lot of sticky filaments wrapped around them. The white eggs were slightly contracting as if they were beating. They exuded a faint, fishy smell like swill. Dean was relieved. His guess was right. This was the real nest of the silencers. Chapter 528. There's actually another nest here. Ian stared blankly at the oval-shaped white eggs that stood silently around him. Ruby gulped down a mouthful of saliva and said, "This wouldn't be the silencer's ovaries, right? Are these the eggs of the wind listeners that haven't hatched yet?" Luna and Rosemary's eyes lit up as soon as they heard his words. There was a hint of greed in their eyes. If these were the eggs of the silencers, then it meant that they were the offspring of rare monsters. As long as they hatched and entered the growth stage, they would be able to kill them and take out their parasitic soulworms. Looking at the number of eggs around them, there were at least dozens of them. This was simply a windfall. Boom! Suddenly, a violent rumbling sound came from the cave above them, pulling everyone's thoughts back to reality. Before anyone could react, they heard a furious roar, loud and clear to the extreme, like a thunderclap exploding out. Amidst this roar, the entire lair trembled slightly, and the black substance on the rock walls began to fall off. Ian and others' faces turned pale as they looked up. They saw a lot of dust falling from the hole they had dug. It seemed that the cave would collapse at any time. "Quick, find an exit," Ian said quickly. Dean shook his head. "It's useless. There is no way out. It's closed." Ruby, Luna, and others were startled. They looked at him in puzzlement. There was a trace of fear in their eyes. It seemed that they were afraid of what Dean had said. Dean wryly smiled. "There is no wind around. Captain, didn't you feel that the temperature here is very high? It's much higher than the surface. If I'm not wrong, then the environment here is constructed according to the environment of the ovaries. To incubate these eggs requires a higher temperature. Therefore, the wind listeners have completely sealed this place. Even if there is a passage, it will be closed. It will need to be dug, and the passage will only connect to the cave above." Everyone reacted after hearing his words. The abnormal temperature and the stuffy air were indeed, as Dudian said. There was no breeze. Luna couldn't help but ask, "Then, what should we do? Are we just going to wait for death here? That thing will enter the cave soon and find this place. Won't we be walking right into a trap?" Ian's expression changed. He gritted his teeth and said, "Now that things have come to this, we can only fight with our lives on the line. Immediately set up the traps and prepare for battle. If we find an opportunity, we will rush out. Ruby and Eugene, you two look for the exit first. Maybe there are other exits." Ruby and Eugene nodded. They held their torches high and walked along the gap between the white eggs. After a while, the two returned to the front of the team. Ruby said bitterly, "There's really no exit. There are rock walls everywhere." Hearing this, the expressions of Ian and the others who held onto their last trace of hope dimmed, and they were slightly disappointed. However, they were prepared beforehand, so they weren't too disappointed. Ian and Martin quickly composed themselves and continued to prepare the traps in their hands. There were poison nets made of special materials, hidden arrow cartridges, and other trap materials that were easy to carry with them. They were placed in the shadows below the hole. A moment later, the trap was completed. Ian took a deep breath and took a few steps back. He hid near a white egg and whispered, Prepare to ambush. Everyone held their breath and waited. After a few minutes, Martin suddenly said in a low voice, "There seems to be no movement from above for a long time." Ian was startled for a moment. He suddenly remembered that since the previous roar, the movement from above had gradually stopped. Did the thing give up on chasing them? Luna, who was hiding behind another white egg, whispered, "Is it because its body is too big that it is stuck in the cave and can't get in?" "It's possible." Ian's eyes slightly flashed as he recalled the previous roar. He shook his head. It should still be in the cave. It hasn't left yet. Everyone naturally knew this. If it had left, the loud footsteps would have gradually faded away, but in reality, it did not. Instead, it had stopped. Obviously, after that thing couldn't squeeze into the cave anymore, it seemed to be preparing to wait for a hare. After squatting for a while, Eugene was the first to stand up. He gasped and said, "It's too hot here. Since it can't come in, should we go up and wait?" Ian frowned and immediately said, "Keep your voice down. Don't disturb it. This kind of thing has a big appetite and generally doesn't have much patience. It will leave soon. Don't act rashly." Eugene shrugged his shoulders but didn't say anything. Gradually, everyone came out of their hiding places. They looked as if they had just been fished out of the water. Their messy hair drooped over their hard skulls. Only Ian was not sweating at all, and his body temperature was normal. "Are we going to wait like this?" Ruby asked. Ian nodded. "Wait until it leaves." Seeing that there was no other way, everyone didn't say anything. They just looked for a clean place to sit down and rest. However, there was not a single clean spot in the lair. The ground was covered in a sticky substance that looked like feces, but also like the mucus secreted by monsters. Some of them looked like molted soft skin that hung together and emitted a thick stench like mud. In the hot and sultry temperature, the stench spread to the extreme. Luna covered her nose. Her face was pale. Her body was soft, as if she would faint at any time. Ian, Martin, and others were worried as they saw that her situation was not good. Ian fanned Luna and said, "Drink some water. Calm down." Luna weakly nodded. She took out some water from her backpack and drank some. Her face was slightly better, but it didn't take long for her body to sweat. Her face was very pale as she sat on the ground. Martin frowned and said, "We can't go on like this. The smell here is too strong. Let's let Luna go up first. Let her stay here." Ian looked at Luna, who would faint at any time. He hesitated for a moment and nodded. Everyone worked together to send Luna out of the hole. Luna was lying on the top of the hole, gasping for the fresh air outside. She felt a little better now. Dean was secretly glad as he saw Luna's appearance. Fortunately, he had replaced the magic marks of the defiler in time. An overly sensitive sense of smell was good at times, but its weakness was very obvious. Although Luna wasn't a noble lady and could tolerate some unpleasant smells, but it wasn't a matter of tolerance. It was a physiological reaction of the body, just like some people would vomit when they smelled certain smells. Among the 5 senses of the human body, smell was the one that stimulated the nerves the most. Excessive stimulation of the nerves would lead to the body being unable to bear it. It was normal for the body to faint. "Let's spread out. Don't stick together," Ian said to the rest. Everyone sat in a slightly spaced position and waited in silence. The nest was completely silent. Only the white eggs that were bouncing gently could be heard. 1 hour, 2 hours, more than 10 hours passed in the blink of an eye. There was still no movement from the top of the cave. It made people suspect that the thing had left, but they still didn't dare to act rashly because it was very likely that the thing was sleeping there. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. In the nest, everyone's expressions were ugly. Although they had already gotten used to this stuffy and oddly smelly environment after 5 days, they didn't expect that the thing that had caused such a huge commotion would actually wait outside for so long. According to Ian's initial deduction, the thing should have left in less than a day. But now, 5 days had passed, and there was still no movement outside. "The temperature here is too high. Our food is going to spoil." Rosemary took out water and drank a little. She only wet her lips and put it away. She said to Ian, "We will starve to death here if we continue like this." although they didn't consume any physical strength during the wait, but the basic needs were still very high. Although their food was sealed and waterproof, but it couldn't withstand the high temperature. Ian's face was gloomy, but he didn't say a word. Rosemary saw that he didn't have a plan. She sighed and turned to look at Ruby. Ruby had thrown away the bag of food before entering the cave. Now they could only rely on the food in their backpacks to survive. The food was only enough for them to live frugally for half a month. Although they wouldn't starve to death after half a month, but in the state of empty stomach, all aspects of the body would naturally decline, including reaction. I don't think it's a good idea to continue to wait. Dean glanced at the people sitting around the cave. When he saw that the time was almost right, his eyes flashed and he whispered, "If that thing falls asleep, it will sleep for half a month. We won't be able to hold on for so long. What do you think we should do?" Martin squinted at Dudian. Although Dudian's previous performance was good, he was a little irritated after staying here for 5 days in a row. Chapter 529. Go up and check the situation. Who will go? Who will be willing to go? Ian, Martin, and the others were slightly stunned and frowned. Eugene's face changed as he felt Dean's gaze. "Why are you looking at me like that?" "It means that I propose you to go," Dean said straightforwardly. Eugene's mouth twitched. "You are the one who proposed this. Of course you will go. What do you mean by asking me to go? Are you trying to frame me?" Dean calmly said, "You have retreated in the previous battle. This is your chance to atone for your sins. Moreover, my ability is biased towards perception. You're good at fighting and flexible. You can come back in time if there is an accident. I have no enmity with you. So why would I frame you? This is based on the current situation. Everyone has to contribute to the team, right?" Eugene's face was full of anger, but his eyes were cold. He glanced at Ian, Martin, Rosemary, and others. The killing intent in his heart grew stronger as he saw that they didn't say anything. "You said that you have the perception ability. I propose that you go. You don't need to get close to it. You can see if that thing is left or is sleeping." Eugene clenched his fists as he said in a cold tone. He didn't follow Dean's words because Dean's words were too watertight. If he was replaced by someone else, then he would be led by the nose by Dean's words. After all, Martin and Ian were the strongest in the team when it came to flexibility. But he couldn't mention them. Once he did, it would be tantamount to losing their votes, and he would be pushed to the opposite side. Dean calmly said, "My perception is limited to the heat source. The thing can quietly get close to the wind listener's nest and kill them. I don't need to think about it to know that it is a cold-blooded monster. My perception is useless against it." Eugene stared straight at him. Suddenly, his eyes flashed, and he said angrily, "You clearly want to harm me. Just because I stopped you from playing with that little girl last time, you've been holding a grudge against me?" Dean was startled. Ian, Martin, and the others' eyes flashed, and they frowned. Dean immediately reacted. He was deliberately making up words to tell others that the purpose of his proposal was not pure. He had ulterior motives so that the possibility of others agreeing would be reduced. "You still have the cheek to mention the little girl from last time?" Dean got up and stared at Eugene in anger. Eugene, Ian, and others were scared. They thought that Dean was going to use force. Dean said in an angry tone, "Are you still a human? That little girl wasn't even half your height, and she wasn't even 7 or 8 years old, yet you could do such a disgusting thing. And now you're even biting back at me. Yes, I admit that I don't like you because of that matter, and I have some thoughts about you. But this time, my suggestion is only out of consideration for the current situation." Eugene was stunned as he looked at Dean's angry face. If he didn't know that he was just making up such a thing and they didn't know each other before then, he would have believed Dean. He was shocked as he thought about this point. He noticed that Ian and others were looking at him with contempt, especially Rosemary. Her eyes were full of disgust. His heart was half cold. He thought that Dean would deny and defend himself after making up this matter. He had prepared the follow-up words to make Dean's denial and defense look pale and false. But he didn't expect Dean to directly admit it. Moreover, he was making up a counter-accusation. Ruthless. Very ruthless. His face was ugly as he stared at Dean. He clenched his fists. Dean was also staring at him. His chest was violently heaving up and down. It seemed that he was enduring great anger. I agree, Rosemary said. Eugene didn't contribute in the last battle. This time we can go and check the situation. That thing hasn't moved for a long time. Most likely it is sleeping. There shouldn't be any danger. Eugene almost vomited blood as he heard her words. No danger? Then why don't you go? Martin took a deep look at Dean and glanced at Eugene. I also agree. We can't continue to wait like this. I recommend Eugene to be the most suitable person to go up. Eugene almost choked out blood. Recommend? What kind of good thing is this? Do I need your recommendation? Ian looked at Eugene. Since everyone has agreed, then you can go up and check. We will support you in time if there is any danger. Yes, Ruby said in a loud voice. What are you afraid of? What Little Dew said makes sense. That thing is probably asleep. Maybe it left quietly, but we didn't notice it. You just need to take a look at the situation from a distance. What's there to be afraid of? Eugene's cheeks turned purple. There is nothing to be afraid of. Then why don't you go? Ruby rolled his eyes and said, Look at my build. Do I look like someone who can run fast? Puff. Eugene was so angry that he almost fainted. He looked around at the crowd. He knew that the situation was hopeless. No matter how hard he tried, they wouldn't let Dean or Ruby go. After all, Ruby was an old member of their team. Dean was a perceptive type, so he was indispensable. Eugene was a combat type, but Martin and Ian were there, so they wouldn't pay too much attention to him. Thinking of this, the anger on his face suddenly disappeared. He stared at Dean coldly and said, I wanted to observe you more, but since you are courting death, I will fulfill your wish. Dean's eyes flashed when he heard this. Ian, Martin, and others heard Eugene's words. Ian immediately said, Eugene, don't be impulsive. What do you mean? Do you want to kill each other? Martin narrowed his eyes as he stared at Eugene. Ruby and Rosemary also looked at Eugene. They didn't want to help Dean, but they hated people like Eugene. Oh, Eugene's mouth slightly twitched as he looked at everyone's reaction. He pulled out a smile, but there was no smile in his eyes. Do you really think that I'm a soft persimmon? Ian, Martin, you better not intervene. This is between me and the kid. Ian frowned. I don't care what personal grudges you have, but no infighting is allowed in the execution of the task. Eugene chuckled and said, You're right, so I'm going to carry out my mission, your task. Chapter 530. Her Highness Hathaway, Ian, and others were stunned as they looked at Eugene. They didn't expect that Eugene's backer would be the sister of the Saintess. Ian was startled for a moment and turned to look at Dean. Dean was able to provoke Her Highness Hathaway and was still alive. It seemed that he wasn't a simple nobody. Dean's eyes lit up as he heard Eugene's words. He thought that Eugene was sent by Haisha's supporters to assassinate him, but it didn't seem like it. After all, there were many opportunities to assassinate him, especially when he was fighting with the Pecker. However, Eugene didn't act. Now it seemed that Hathaway sent Eugene because she wanted to know more about him. It also showed that she wanted to use him as a chess piece again. You still don't want to give up after getting the Saintess identity. Dean's eyes narrowed as killing intent rose in his heart. He glanced at Ian and others and saw their expressions. He slowly said, Captain, this is our private matter. I hope you won't intervene. If he dies, then just report to the higher-ups that he was killed by the monster. Ian, Martin, and others were startled as they saw Dean's murderous look. They knew that the battle couldn't be stopped. Ian knew the purpose of Dean's words. He was worried that they would help Eugene because of the existence of Her Highness Hathaway. But how could they do such a stupid thing? He didn't need to think about it to know that the person who offended Her Highness Hathaway must have a powerful force behind him. The ordinary dragon guards couldn't afford to provoke such a person. Ian hoped that both of them would perish together if necessary. It would be best if both of them died here, so that they wouldn't have to explain it to anyone when they go back. But at the moment, there was a monster sleeping above. If the two of them fought too much and alarmed the monster, then everyone would be in danger. Ian whispered after hesitating for a while, Why don't you wait for the monster to leave? If we startle it, we'll all die. Eugene sneered, no. There won't be any movement if we deal with it. After that, the muscles of his whole body slightly swelled, and the outline of golden scales faintly appeared under the cheekbones of his cheeks. This was the characteristic of releasing the full power of the magic mark. Ian was stunned when he saw the change in Eugene. His expression changed slightly. He was extremely sensitive to temperature. Although he didn't have thermal vision, he could still feel the obvious change in the temperature of Eugene's body. It had suddenly increased by several degrees. This had exceeded the temperature of a normal human body. If it was an ordinary person, such a high temperature would have already caused them to die. Dean had the most intuitive feeling. He clearly saw that the heat in Eugene's body was boiling rapidly. It was several times stronger than the heat in the bodies of all the people present, including Martin. Eugene's heat concentration was faintly approaching the level of a pioneer. He was not surprised. Instead, he let out a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Hathaway was not too crazy to send a pioneer here to observe him. In that case, he would not have the confidence to fight with her. However, it made sense. Even in the dragon tribe where masters were as numerous as clouds, pioneers were very rare. Most of them were in high positions. How could they waste time to observe a small chess piece like him? Martin noticed the change in Ian's expression and looked at him. Ian gave him a wink. Martin was startled for a moment. There was a trace of deep fear in his eyes. He looked at Eugene with a dignified face. He quietly clenched the sword in his hand. He had a hunch that after Eugene killed Dean, he wouldn't leave them alive. Luna, Rosemary, Ruby, and others saw the eyes of Ian and Martin. They suddenly realized what was going on. They were secretly on alert. In the hot and stuffy sealed nest, the atmosphere was tense and murderous. Numerous white eggs were beating gently. They were like eyeballs that were quietly observing the civil war between the invaders. Eugene smiled and looked at Dean. You should have seen it with your thermal vision. You seemed to be very arrogant before. You want to go back and report that I was killed by a monster? Oh, now I will give you a chance to pledge allegiance to Her Royal Highness Hathaway. If you go back, you will meet with Her Royal Highness and listen to her punishment. How about it? Dean's heart moved. He controlled his face to show an ugly expression. He even forced out a little cold sweat. He couldn't help but slightly clench his fists. It seemed that he wanted to retreat, but couldn't take a step. He gloomily said, I'm loyal to the Saintess Hathaway. If you hurt me, the Saintess won't let you go. Eugene sneered. Didn't you vow to kill me before? Why are you so scared now? At the same time, he slowly walked towards Dean. Dean saw that Eugene was slowly approaching him. He slowly took a step back and pulled out his bow. He used the characteristics of an archer to take the lead, and at the same time, retreated to increase the distance between them. Eugene sneered. He took a step forward and avoided Dean's arrow. He instantly approached Dean, who was retreating. The nest was not spacious because of the white eggs. Dean's archer skills couldn't be used in such an environment. This was one of the reasons why Eugene was disdainful. It's over. Despicable boy. Eugene raised his sword as he looked down at Dean and slashed down. The ugly expression on Dean's face disappeared. He calmly looked at Eugene. There was even a hint of a smile on his face. This wisp of danger that suddenly appeared caused Eugene's heart to jerk, and he was slightly stunned. Bang! Dean instantly punched out. The fist was like a black cannonball as it hit Eugene's chest. Dragon armor instantly caved in. There was a faint sound of bones breaking. The heavy force made Eugene's body lose balance. He fell back and naturally lost his strength. Although his posture didn't change, Dean easily dodged the attack. Tap! Tap! Eugene retreated 3 steps. He saw Dean was about to pounce. He hurriedly jumped back and pulled away more than 10 meters away from Dean. His face was a bit ugly. He even broke out in cold sweat. At the same time, he felt a bit angry. As a swordsman, he took the initiative to pull away from an archer. It was a shame. However, he didn't care about it at this moment. What really annoyed him was that he was once again fooled by Dean. Dean quietly stood in place and once again held the bow and arrow. He aimed at Eugene, but didn't shoot. It seemed that he was looking for Eugene's flaws. Eugene didn't dare to act rashly. He was ready to cut the arrow at any time. Then he would step forward when Dean shot another arrow. He was careless before and was hit by Dean. In any case, Dean was an archer. His archery skills showed that he had studied archery for a long time. Naturally, his melee combat ability would be relatively weak. Both of them confronted each other. The atmosphere was dignified. Time seemed to stop flowing. 2 or 3 minutes passed in a blink of an eye. Eugene gently gasped. The pain from his chest made him angry. But he had calmed down. His body instinctively reacted faster when he was punched. Eugene panted softly. The pain in his chest made him angry, but he had already calmed down. The moment he was hit, his body's instinctive reaction was faster. He gathered his strength to protect his chest in time, or else he would have been more seriously injured. Eugene gently gasped. The pain in his chest made him angry, but he had calmed down. His body's instinctive reaction was faster when he was hit by Dean's punch. Otherwise, his injuries would be more serious. At least he could judge that although there was a gap between him and the youth, the gap wasn't big. Fortunately, the surrounding environment helped him. In this narrow environment, Dean would have to fight him in close combat. Eugene was startled. He felt a trace of anger. He was cheated again. Dean didn't shoot the arrow. It was clear that he wanted to consume his energy and physical strength. He didn't want to shoot the arrow, but in such a confrontation, he needed to maintain his peak state at all times. Otherwise, the brute force of Dean's punch was enough to make him unable to dodge. Damn, Eugene cursed in his heart. He took the lead to attack. The longer the stalemate, the more he would suffer. Dean decisively shot the arrow as he saw Eugene pounce on him. Whoosh! As the arrow flew past, Eugene quickly brandished his sword and blocked it. Dean didn't think as he shot the arrow. He stared at Eugene and pulled out an arrow. Bang! He stabbed the arrow towards Eugene's face at the same time as he waved his sword. Eugene's body slid like a fish as he dodged Dean's arrow and cut towards Dean. Dean saw Eugene's movement and thought of the dragon's thorns that he had read before. Suddenly, an idea flashed through his mind. He crouched and kicked at Eugene's crotch while dodging the saber. Eugene's face changed as he jumped back a few steps. He looked at Dean in anger. Despicable boy, do you only know these dirty tricks? It's a good move if I can win. Dean indifferently said. Eugene was angry, but his heart was exceptionally calm. He was acting to make Dean think that he was in a state of anger. Insidious boy, your hidden strength has been exposed. I admit that you're almost the same as me in terms of physique, but you're still dead. Your bow and arrows are only for primary limitless, so you can't use your full strength. But I have a sword. Dean narrowed his eyes. I have one too. Where? In your hand. Eugene was so angry that he laughed. Then I'll give it to you, he roared as he rushed out. His figure moved in a straight line as he stabbed out with his sword. The sword slightly vibrated as it stabbed out. This subtle vibration was extremely important as it would confuse the opponent's judgment. Dean's muscles contracted as his pupils shrank to the extreme. Although he was still a senior hunter and his strength was around level 45, which was equivalent to a primary limitless expert. But he didn't know why he felt his blood boiling. It was as if his heart was longing for such a battle. He even had the desire to devour the opponent. Whoosh! The moment the saber stabbed at him, he suddenly retreated a few steps. His body swayed as he dodged the saber. Don't run away. Eugene grinned. Didn't you want the sword? I'll give it to you. Dean twisted his body and dodged the knife. At the same time, he jumped 7 or 8 meters away like a wolf. He arrived at Eugene's previous position and exchanged positions with him. Ian, Martin, and others were shocked. They didn't expect the two newcomers to be so strong. Eugene's speed and reaction speed seemed to be faster and more sensitive than Dean's. Whoosh! Eugene rushed towards Dean again. Dean stared at him as he quickly crawled. His posture was extremely strange. It didn't look like a human's posture at all. But at this moment, Dean didn't care about the posture. There was only battle in his mind, and there were only 2 things in the battle: dodge and attack. He was looking for flaws in his attack. His body instinctively dodged. Eugene's wonderful movements and the tricky angle of the sword fell into Dean's eyes. He didn't have time to think about the layout like before. He just instinctively dodged. At the same time, there was a wonderful feeling in his heart. It was like a hunter's excitement and thirst for blood before hunting. Whoosh! Dean's body swayed as he once again dodged Eugene's attack. So fast. When his body crawled to the other side, the rapidly changing scenery around him made him have such a thought. He suddenly became a little excited. The magic mark on his chest seemed to be gently twisting, giving him a wonderful feeling. Do you only know how to dodge? Eugene was a bit surprised as he felt that his speed had slowed down or Dean's speed had increased. Did Dean's physique grow at an astonishing rate in just a few breaths of time? It was impossible. There was a trace of fear in his heart. He pretended to be angry as he roared. As he roared and rushed over, a signal flashed in Dean's mind. Kill. He didn't think as his body suddenly pounced forward. There was a trace of joy in Eugene's eyes as he saw Dean pouncing towards him. He knew that Dean had fallen into his trap. He roared and swung his sword. He used the most destructive fighting stance in the Dragon Blade chapter. Dragon God Slash. The sword was powerful and could exert 200% of its power, but it was doomed to not have too many curves and techniques. Dean's eyes narrowed as his body twisted strangely. It seemed that in addition to his hands and feet, there were several invisible limbs around his body that were assisting him. He passed by the sword and stretched out his palm. His nails soared a lot as he stretched out his palm. His nails sank deep into the flesh of Eugene's wrist. Take off! Dean roared in his heart. Chapter 531. Eugene's pupils shrank, and his face was full of shock. He hurriedly used his other hand to grab the saber in his broken hand. Dean mercilessly held his broken wrist and waved the sword. He used the broken wrist as the hilt. The sharp blade cut towards Dean's palm. Eugene was scared and retracted his hand. Dean took the opportunity to retreat and widen the distance. The fierce battle was over. Dean coldly stared at Eugene. He grabbed the hilt of the sword and pulled out the severed hand. He threw on the ground. He didn't dare to continue to attack, as he didn't want to let go of the sword. This life-or-death confrontation caused Ian and the others to break out in a cold sweat. They felt a shiver run down their spines. They knew that if they were to fight against either side, they would have most likely been defeated or even killed. Eugene's face was ugly. He held his broken hand to stop the bleeding. He didn't want to waste any more of his strength. The severe pain made him clench his teeth. But there was a trace of fear in his heart. He didn't care about the pain in his arm. He felt like he was falling into an ice cave. All of this happened in a short period of time. Dean's moves were beyond his expectations. He had lost his right hand and weapon. He didn't have the slightest confidence to defeat Dean with his ordinary basic armor. Failure meant death. He would lose everything, including his loved ones and loved ones. Dean looked at Eugene's broken hand. His eyes turned cold. He didn't stay any longer and quickly waved his sword. Eugene stared at him. His left hand had loosened his right hand. Although his right hand didn't have a palm, both of his hands were still open in a defensive posture. Whoosh! 10 meters of distance was crossed in an instant. Dean's sword was aimed at Eugene's chest. Eugene decisively grabbed Dean's wrist. He wanted to take back the weapon. There were 7 or 8 techniques recorded in the Dragon Blade chapter. It was enough to deal with all kinds of situations. As long as he could take back the weapon, then he would have the hope to reverse the situation. Although his left hand wasn't as flexible as his right hand, but due to long-term training, he wouldn't neglect his left hand, so its flexibility wasn't any worse than Dean's. If Dean gave him a chance, he would have asked Ian and others to help him. Unfortunately, Dean's attack was too fast. Eugene couldn't be distracted as he wanted to end the battle in one go. Whoosh! Eugene's eyes flashed with joy as Dean's wrist was caught by Eugene. It's over, Dean suddenly said. Eugene was startled as he was about to twist Dean's wrist. Before he could react, he suddenly saw Dean raise his other hand. Almost at the same time when he caught Dean's wrist, Dean raised his other hand and held the sword in his hand. Weapon fight? Puff! Blood bloomed out as the sword flashed. Eugene's body was numb, as if he was electrocuted. He couldn't muster up any strength. Feeling horrified, he let go of Dean's wrist and touched his neck. The hot and viscous liquid covered his fingers. This clear touch caused his heart to violently twitch, followed by boundless fear. He opened his mouth slightly and suddenly wanted to give up all his dignity to beg Dean to let him live and save him. But he saw that Dean had put away the sword and was quietly looking at him. There was no emotion in his eyes, as if he was looking at an ant. The darkness instantly pressed down, and with a bang, Eugene's body fell down. Dean looked at him to confirm that he was dead. He slowly turned around. Although he had his back to Ian and others, but he could see the eyes of Ian and others. He knew what they were thinking. It's not good to stay here for a long time. We have to leave as soon as possible. I hope everyone can help us by saying that we were attacked by a monster and he was killed by a monster. Ian and others were startled. They looked at each other and quickly communicated. Ian deeply looked at Dean. He slowly suppressed the killing intent in his heart and nodded. We will. Ian would have led Martin and others to take the opportunity to kill Dean if it wasn't for the fact that Dean wasn't injured and the battle didn't last long. After all, Eugene was one of Her Highness Hathaway's people. Dean killed him, and they were witnesses. They weren't sure whether Dean would kill Eugene in order to hide this matter or not. However, now that Dean had said this and wanted to leave, it was obvious that he didn't want to fight. Martin didn't dare to act rashly. After all, Dean's strength was too strong. Even if the 5 of them attacked together, they would suffer heavy casualties, even if they could kill Dean. When are you going to leave? Martin asked. Dean looked at him and said calmly, I'll take a break first. I'll leave when my physical strength is restored. I'll wait and see. If our battle has alarmed the monsters above, I'll die if I go up now. Ian and Martin looked at each other and frowned. Their eyes were a little dignified. After hesitating for a while, they finally gave up the plan to attack. They weren't sure whether Dean was deliberately looking for an excuse to restore his physical strength or not. However, since Dean said it so openly and reasonably, they couldn't oppose it. They couldn't help but feel a little entangled in their hearts. Dean inserted the sword into the ground and took out the food and water from his backpack to eat and drink. There was a trace of excitement and fear in his heart when he recalled the previous battle. The reason why he dared to challenge Eugene, who had reached the peak of senior frontiersman, was mainly because of the intuition passed to him by his body. The intuition told him that the pioneer was dangerous and Eugene could fight with him. Just like the predators in the jungle wouldn't hunt prey that was stronger than themselves. Otherwise, it wouldn't be hunting, it would be called delivering food. I feel like I'm still missing something. Dean recalled the previous battle. Although there was a feeling of release, he always felt that there was something missing in his body, which made his body not flexible enough, and even somewhat awkward. Perhaps, if he grew more hands and feet, it would be more natural. Thinking of this, the image of Splitter appeared in his mind. Rich blade-like limbs and a horrible body that twisted like seaweed. His eyes flashed, and he suddenly thought of a point. The magic mark could give the host similar abilities of monsters. From a biological point of view, it was hereditary. At the same time, the magic mark would be activated again to change the body. This was called evolution. So, since he could inherit some of the physical abilities of monsters, could he also inherit the fighting style of monsters? Dean thought of the feeling of fighting in his heart. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was so. Before, he always felt that he couldn't display it. But if he imagined that his body had more limbs like Splitter, it seemed that it would be very carefree. The thought of carefree was a signal from his body, just like the brain knew when the stomach was hungry. In other words, the body had such a demand. The parasitic soul worm stayed in Splitter's body for too long. It completely integrated the fighting habits of Splitter and passed it to me. Dean frowned slightly. His body naturally couldn't grow more limbs like Splitter. This would make it difficult for him to stand in the normal human circle inside the giant wall. After all, even a saint like Aisha couldn't have a strange body that didn't look like a human. This would cause panic. He looked down at his hand and gently twisted it thoughtfully. But he found that the bones of his wrist were like a soft body. They were easily twisted to a strange angle. He couldn't help but be startled. He hadn't found that he could do this before, but this time he was forced to use his instinct in the crisis. Instead, his body showed this ability on its own. Although my body hasn't transformed into the shape of Splitter, but I am able to display a fighting state similar to Splitter. It means that my body is changing. Not only am I adapting to the transformation of the magic marks, but the magic marks are also gradually adapting to the transformation of the new host. The characteristics of Splitter and my body are gradually fusing with each other. Studied pondered. When Dean twisted his arm, Ian and others had been paying attention to him. They saw that his arm could be twisted to a horrible breaking position. Their faces slightly changed. Recalling his previous strange fighting posture, their eyes were full of fear. Hey! Suddenly, there was a sound of surprise. Everyone was surprised. They looked at the source of the sound. They saw Rosemary standing in front of a broken white egg. She pointed to the thing inside the egg and said with a surprised face, "What is this? It doesn't seem to be that you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories."